In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Decadent Society, How We Became the Victims of Our Own Success by Russ Douthat, a New York Times columnist. And this is from, it's about the middle of his first chapter. This is a subchapter titled The Limits of Neoliberalism. There's no shortage of theories to explain this great stagnation, to borrow a phrase from one of the theorizers, the George Mason University economist Tyler Cowen. And there's also no need to simply choose between them. Like most broad trends, the economic decadence of the developed world is overdetermined, and almost every serious attempt at explanation will contain some element of truth. The most politically appealing theories, the ones animating our populist and socialist insurgencies, tend to blame neoliberalism itself, claiming that the medicine for 1970s stagflation has proven to be poisonous in large doses. The push for ever freer trade has hollowed out Western economies, the argument goes, offshoring productive industries and killing decent jobs, making financiers and knowledge workers rich while the middle class shrinks steadily. Meanwhile, low tax rates intended to spur investment have enabled the rich to keep more of their gains while starving the programs required to protect the poor and boost the working classes. Antitrust policy has become so fixated on the so-called benefits of consolidation, lower prices for consumers, that it has ignored all the ways that market-dominant corporations can warp policies and strangle innovation. And anti-inflationary policies, forged to counteract a crisis that's now generations behind us, have been adopted as a dogma that's now by the West's financial and political elite, which demands fiscal austerity under every circumstance and deprives struggling economies of the cash they need to grow. You don't have to accept every aspect of this argument, and indeed the populists of the left and right disagree about which aspects to stress, to see that it describes a real phenomenon, perhaps not the outright failure of neoliberalism, but diminishing returns from some of its preferred policies, and an overconfidence among the Western leadership class that solutions from the 1970s are permanently applicable. On trade, for instance, the general principle that open markets have more winners than losers led policy make permanent upper bracket tax cutting, as practiced by America's Republican Party, won't produce the hoped-for spillover effects among the bottom 95%. It's possible that the initial economic insight that some corporate consolidation could be good for consumers was useful for antitrust decision-making in the 1970s and 80s, but needs to be corrected as monopolies regather. It's possible that a program of deficit reduction and tight money that makes sense when inflation is galloping doesn't make sense when we're closer to deflation. The countries sometimes need a loose monetary policy to fight stagnation, and having a financial overclass too fixated on the perils of a for now imaginary inflation is a recipe for permanently lower growth. Then, alongside this brief against an overextended neoliberalism, there's a more subtle argument pushed by the more serious sort. I think I skipped a page here. Sort of liberalism that the neoliberal program hasn't so much pushed too far as pushed in the wrong direction. In this argument, we don't need less deregulation, but a different kind than we have, because incumbents and insiders in the West have captured the sprawling regulatory state and used it to freeze out potential competition. The age of stagnation, according to this theory, is the fruit of what Brink Lindsay of the Niskensen Institute and Stephen Tellez of Johns Hopkins University describe as a captured economy, in which everything from land use rules to exclusionary zoning to occupational licensing to ever-expanding intellectual property protections to corporate subsidies and tax breaks all converge to create a system that's basically the worst of socialism and the worst of capitalism conjoined. Plutocratic and sclerotic, overregulated and undertaxed, with an upper class enriching itself off rents rather than innovation, and a service class that can't advance beyond its station. The overlap between this more libertarian argument and the left-wing critique of neoliberalism is apparent in one of the texts of the post-financial crisis left, French economist Thomas Piketty's 2013 tome Capital in the 21st Century, which mined centuries worth of statistics to argue that capitalism inherently makes the rich richer because returns on capital will always be higher than simple economic growth unless some powerful force intervenes. The forces that intervened in the 20th century were the Great Depression and 2 world wars, which not only provided the impetus for massive government interventions, but destroyed outright a great deal of capitalist wealth. The book is The Decadent Society by Russ Douthat.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, happy Wednesday. We've got a lot going on in the program today. In our first hour, Congressman Mark Pocan will be with us in just about a minute to take your calls for the full hour. Middays with Mark, 202-808-9925 is our number if you have a call for Congressman Pocan. Professor Richard Wolff will kick off our second hour, the American Inflation Act. What's the economic impact of our jobs coming home? Some really startling news in that front, the economic front there. And also my rant today over at HartmannReport.com in our second hour. The Senate is not 50-50, yet America, the Senate is 50-50, but America is not. Abraham Lincoln, Benjamin Harrison, and Ulysses S. Grant all added states well below the actual threshold, the legal threshold for adding a state, specifically to cement Republican control of the United States Senate in the 1860s, the 1870s, and the 1890s. All three of them, nakedly political. It's time for Democrats to start talking about doing the same. We'll get to that in the second hour. In the third hour, I want to tell you the real story of Mikhail Gorbachev. There's a chapter about it in my new book, The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, that'll be out in a week or so. Gorbachev just passed away. It's an amazing story. What he tried, he literally was trying to turn Russia into Sweden. He wanted to make it a progressive, an extraordinarily progressive new nation, a new contributor to the world. And who sold him out? George H.W. Bush. And basically engineered a whole program to say, no, you can't get IMF loans unless you adopt neoliberalism, which they did, and that brought us Putin and everything else. We'll tell you about that in the third hour. And also Malcolm Nance in our third hour, behind the ideology of the Trump insurgency. So, to start off, it is Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Mark Pocan, he represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin. He's a member and former co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He's on the Appropriations, Education, and Labor Committees in the U.S. House. His website, pocan.house.gov, P-O-C-A-N. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan, R-E-P as in representative. Representative Pocan, welcome back to the program.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Glad to be here.
Great to have you with us. I had an idea yesterday. I tweeted it out. I put it on Facebook. I wanted to just, run it by you and see what your thoughts are on it. There's a very real possibility that Donald Trump will be indicted. And you got Lindsey Graham and all these people running around going, "Oh my God, there'll be riots in the streets. They're going to burn." It's so kind of ironic because these are the same people who, when cops kill black people and people show up in the streets, they're like, "Oh my God, it's lawlessness." But anyhow, he's promoting this. So anyhow, my tweet was, anybody have ideas on how to start a movement for upscale Democrats, in other words, Democrats who can afford to do this, across the nation, to call their local bar, just call one local bar, if enough people did this, and say, "Here's my credit card, drinks on the house when the indictment of Donald Trump is announced, charge it to my card, don't mention my name." And it's starting to go viral. Do you think we're going to have parties all across the United States if Trump is indicted?
Yes.
I'm thinking so.
Yes. It's amazing. For all of us who lived through the last 4 years and watched it closely and have been concerned about our democracy. The good news, Tom, is I think a couple of weeks ago, the number one issue in the country was our democracy over the economy, over the Roe decision. People are actually finally thinking about the threats to the democracy, with Donald Trump and the stuff he brought to Mar-a-Lago and all the rest. And that's a great thing, right? I mean, because it's not a Democratic or Republican issue, but it's the most important issue to this country, and people now care about it. And I don't care where they come from on the political spectrum. If they care more about their country than any political party, that's a good thing, and I think that is worthy of celebration. So I do feel that there's some real good tailwinds on this issue.
Yeah, there's a little restaurant bar down the street from us, and I'm thinking of calling them and trying this. If I can just crank up a few other people to go along, but it would be great to start a movement. So normally we start out, as callers are calling in, and there are lines open, by the way, at 202-808-9925. Normally we start out by asking you, what's on your mind, what's going on in Congress, anything we need to know about or you want to tell us about. So let me toss that to you.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, for me, I'm obviously a huge supporter of the American labor movement of, working people across the country. And, this is a big weekend coming up. Not only is it Labor Day weekend, but it's also the highest levels of public support in decades we've had in this country for the labor movement. And Tom, some of the most exciting organizing efforts I have seen in my lifetime are happening right now, whether it be Starbucks or REI, Amazon, go down the list. In industries and areas that have never seen people organizing together to have a collective voice and to be able to fight for better pay and better benefits and safer working conditions, we're seeing it right now. So we really are in a kind of a renaissance of the labor movement in a whole lot of new areas. And personally, I find this extremely exciting going into Labor Day weekend, recognizing why we have weekends, why we have a 40-hour work week, why we have so many of the things that we now consider so commonplace. It's because of the American labor movement. And, for me, this is like a high celebration weekend coming up, and I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, and there's some really exciting stuff going on, by the way. This is the consequence of two pieces of legislation, the infrastructure bill and the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. Honda and LG Energy Solutions just announced that they're spending $4.4 billion to build new battery factories, along with one that General Motors is building in Ohio, Michigan, and Tennessee. Ford is building new battery factories in Kentucky and Tennessee. Toyota is building one in North Carolina. Stellaris is building one in Indiana. All of these have been announced since this legislation. Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear just announced yesterday that Kentucky just got $8.5 billion out of one of these programs. They're going to be producing electric vehicles, 8,000 jobs in the EV sector. First Solar says that they're going to build a new solar panel plant in the Southeast, investing $1 billion. Again, because of the tax credits and things that made that possible. Corning has announced a new manufacturing plant outside Phoenix. They're going to build a $42.5 billion high-speed internet infrastructure investment that was made possible by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. Micron has got a $40 billion investment, 40,000 new jobs in the United States. Qualcomm, $4.2 billion. I mean, it just goes on and on. It's amazing stuff.
Yeah, I mean, just think if we could be in a place in a few decades where we actually would hold a country like Saudi Arabia responsible for the murders of a journalist, as opposed to having to go there and beg them to lower the price of gasoline. It can be transformational. It will help us on the defense budget, something I'm often talking about. There are so many benefits to being more energy independent, and all those measures have done everything you just said, and that's going to create a lot of new family supporting wages. It's all good across the board.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, let's pick up some phone calls here. Brian in Joliet, Illinois, listening to WCPT. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Well, good morning. I would just like to mention global warming and climate change, and Republicans in the House and Senate don't either deny it or seem to think it's not that much of importance. And on Republican TV and radio, they just straight up deny its existence. And I observe on the news all over the world, not only the United States, all over the world, terrible developments, seems like almost daily. I'd like to ask the Congressman what possibly can be done to change the trends of global warming and climate change.
Yeah. Well, Brian, first of all, we did a big chunk of that in the Inflation Reduction Act. There, we're going to reduce emissions by 40% by 2030. That's extremely significant. It's the most significant piece of legislation we've seen in Congress to address climate change, and worthy of celebration across the board. But there's more we need to do as well. The best way you change that is you elect more people who agree with that sentiment that we've got to protect our planet for future generations. And for those who would rather listen to their corporate masters, hold them accountable. Let them go and work in the corporate private sector, because clearly they care about that more than the public sector.
There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Pocan's website is Pocan, POCAN.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan, former co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and a current member in good standing, we might add. And we will be right back with more of your calls for Representative Mark Pocan right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It is 15 minutes past the hour. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. We'll be right back with them. Sean says we could call them TIPs, Trump indictment parties. Rick in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Yes, my concern is very good about the electric cars, but I don't think owning certain hybrids. But I do think it's well worthwhile to consider at some point having used hybrids or used electric cars bought, maybe like just for a dealer, for example.
Yeah, Rick, again, I feel like I'm feeding questions to people, Tom, but they're asking great questions. We did that in the Inflation Reduction Act. We actually have it so people can get tax credits for buying used electric vehicles, exactly addressing what you're saying. To me, the biggest thing is how do we reduce the cost? And that's part of the investments that Tom mentioned earlier that we're putting into all these companies to build the batteries that we need for the vehicles right here in the United States and get that technology moving, because the lower we can bring the cost down, obviously, the better, more people can have it. But Rick, you're completely right. There's going to be a stronger used market. And now that we're providing some tax credits for that, that's exactly what we need to do. So we've done a lot this session, Tom. I'm very proud of the major, 4+ major bills that we did this session, that usually any one of would have been the peak one. This is important, and this is exactly included in that Inflation Reduction Act.
That is great. Doug in Fort Collins, Colorado. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Good morning, gentlemen. How you doing today?
Good.
I want to piggyback off of the guy who called yesterday, endbribes.com, to sign a petition to get Medicare Advantage scaled back, because we all know it's a scam. So I went in there and I filled it out. It was really nice. He provided the link at endbribes.com. And I saw there was a phone number on the site, and I talked to the guy who was administering the petition, and he said it's law that they can use the word Medicare. And I'm like, it's a total scam. Everybody thinks it's a government project, and it's not. And we have to change the law so they cannot use the word Medicare. Is there something, where do we start that process?
I'm with you, Doug.
Yeah, Doug, actually, we're doing that. I'll tell you, and I want to give all the credit to Thom and and Tom's listeners, because we've talked about this issue. We've decided that we wanted to put a bill together, and we're drafting it right now. And we're trying to see if we can get Ro Khanna to be our second lead on it right now, to be able to take away that ability to use the word Medicare, because there's only one Medicare. That's the U.S. government Medicare, and most of these other programs are pale comparisons. My mom went through this. She just passed away in February at 93, but she had one of these Advantage programs, and at her assisted living, before she had some surgery that started her downfall, she needed some help. That if she just had Medicare only, there was help that came into the facility she was at she could have had. But because she had one of these Advantage programs, she had to go to their providers and leave the building, and she wasn't exactly mobile, so she could never get the help she actually needed. So she got less than she was getting with Medicare because she had one of these programs that I think gave her a few bucks towards prescription drugs. Well, we just limited out-of-pocket expenses on prescription drugs. We just made it so we're negotiating for prescription drug prices through Medicare. We're making these more and more relevant. They're only profit centers for a lot of folks. And I completely agree. Legislation's on its way.
That's great. Congressman Mark Pocan with us for the hour, taking your calls here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Middays with Mark. You can find his website at pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. We'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan, one of the great ones, right after this. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So did you hear the story about the three white guys, 20, 22, 24 years old, who just pleaded guilty to trying to attack power grids in 3 different parts of the United States? According to the Justice Department, their scheme was that they were going to bring down electricity for 3 basically major cities or major regions of the United States. And the theory of this program is sort of like what Tim McVeigh was all about back in 1990, I think it was 3, when he blew up the federal building. Their scheme was that doing so, cutting off the power to these cities. Well, this is from the Department of Justice. Quote, the defendants believed their plan would cost the government millions of dollars and cause unrest for Americans in the region. They had conversations about how the possibility of the power being out for months would cause a race war and induce the next Great Depression. They had suicide pills and everything. Why aren't we talking about white terrorism in America? There's a video about this over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. 21 minutes past the hour. We're taking your calls on Middays with Mark for Congressman Mark Pocan. Patrick in East Lansing, Michigan, you are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hi, Representative Pocan. I appreciate all that you do and the Progressive Caucus. I'm really stuck on how it is that we can feel like we have to follow the law if the president, Trump, comes into office and commits crimes in office and pretty clearly has committed crimes beforehand, and now he's committing crimes after, and he's not prosecuted. And the reason I'm asking this is it just seems to fit this picture of corporate crime not being prosecuted and the corporations being given slaps on the wrist and the Department of Justice giving them these deferred prosecution agreements and nobody goes to jail. And John Coffey, who really is our leading person that teaches about corporate crime, has said Congress really needs to act to do something to stop corporate crime. And he has very specific proposals that Congress could enact. I don't see that happening, but there's been like 1,400 corporations that have admitted crimes, not gone to jail, and had that wiped off their record. And I'm pairing that with the special counsel law completely being gutted by Bill Barr, and I'm wondering if people are really talking about it, because today's New York Times has an article by the guy who wrote the regulations on the special.
Skeptical what the Department of Justice would do, and now I've grown to believe that they're being more aggressive and they're taking it all very seriously, and hopefully more will come out of the January 6th committee as they share information with the Department of Justice that could be helpful. I also know that anything the Department of Justice does, or for that matter, the federal government, is glacially slow. I've learned this from being in local government to state government to federal government. So, don't be necessarily dispirited that you don't see something happening yet. I'm seeing the signs that things are happening and moving. It's just they do move slow just by the nature of being the federal government. But I think you made an excellent case for why we absolutely have to prosecute. It doesn't matter who you are. The only way you have a rule of law in this country is if everyone has it applied to evenly.
Joe in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Good morning, gentlemen. I'd like to ask Mr. Pocan about the Railroad Labor Act. As a commercial pilot, we cannot negotiate. We're hammered by the courts if we just even say anything. I was just wondering if there's some kind of relief the transportation industry could get. It's just they hammer us so hard with that, and then they never negotiate. So it's 5-6 years before we get a contract. So just wondering what he has to say about that.
Joe, let me take it from a 30,000 foot, because I'll be honest, I don't have the specifics of that law in front of me. I don't know all the details of it. But what it sounds like you're talking about is something we have that is pretty widespread, which is the problem that even when you have an election to have a form of union, you have to wait sometimes years and years and years in order to get that election. And that's not the way the law is supposed to be. We saw a lot of regression under the Trump era of labor law. We need beefing up of resources for groups like the NLRB and National Labor. There's other entities, government entities that should have it that deal with this area. But we should absolutely be making sure that whenever you have an election, you have the ability, once you've won that election, to form the union. And we don't allow the slowing down that has been allowed under the Trump era and some of the revisions they've made to the rules process. So that is happening. I have great faith in our current Secretary of Labor. But you point out something that unfortunately we see across the board in many, many different industries. And that's part of what we're pushing on to have changes within the Biden administration.
I believe that Railroad Act goes back to the latter part of the 19th century when railroads were considered like essential infrastructure. And it makes it much more difficult for people in the transportation sector, which basically is railroad engineers and airline pilots, to negotiate contracts.
Yeah. No, and again, there's so many areas where it makes it harder for people to be able to get that contract once they've
cleaned this stuff up. Right?
I think it's at a 30,000 foot level, not even specific necessarily to individual laws, although there's obviously that law gives some exceptions. Mm-hmm. We need to make it easier. If you vote to have a union, you should be able to have that union, period, without additional delays.
Yeah, I'm with you. Congressman Mark Pocan with us for the hour. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program, taking your calls for the hour. It's 27 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for Representative Pocan on the other side of this break here at the bottom of the hour. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
You can reach Congressman Pocan at pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan.
This is the Thom Hartmann.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Decadent Society, How We Became the Victims of Our Own Success by Russ Douthat, a New York Times columnist. And this is from, it's about the middle of his first chapter. This is a subchapter titled The Limits of Neoliberalism. There's no shortage of theories to explain this great stagnation, to borrow a phrase from one of the theorizers, the George Mason University economist Tyler Cowen. And there's also no need to simply choose between them. Like most broad trends, the economic decadence of the developed world is overdetermined, and almost every serious attempt at explanation will contain some element of truth. The most politically appealing theories, the ones animating our populist and socialist insurgencies, tend to blame neoliberalism itself, claiming that the medicine for 1970s stagflation has proven to be poisonous in large doses. The push for ever freer trade has hollowed out Western economies, the argument goes. offshoring productive industries and killing decent jobs, making financiers and knowledge workers rich while the middle class shrinks steadily. Meanwhile, low tax rates intended to spur investment have enabled the rich to keep more of their gains while starving the programs required to protect the poor and boost the working classes. Antitrust policy has become so fixated on the so-called benefits of consolidation, lower prices for consumers, that it has ignored all the ways that market-dominant corporations can warp policies and strangle innovation. And anti-inflationary policies, forged to counteract a crisis that's now generations behind us, have been adopted as a dogma that's now by the West's financial and political elite, which demands fiscal austerity under every circumstance and deprives struggling economies of the cash they need to grow. You don't have to accept every aspect of this argument, and indeed the populists of the left and right disagree about which aspects to stress, to see that it describes a real phenomenon, perhaps not the outright failure of neoliberalism, but diminishing returns from some of its preferred policies, and an overconfidence among the Western leadership class that solutions from the 1970s are permanently applicable. On trade, for instance, the general principle that open markets have more winners than losers led policymakers to assume that this would necessarily happen and to overestimate how quickly communities affected by outsourcing would recover and how swiftly other sectors of the economy could compensate. In particular, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology economist David Autor has argued persuasively that the China shock, the dramatic offshoring that followed Beijing's entrance into the World Trade Organization in 2001, inflicted more economic damage on working-class communities in the United States than many experts anticipated, without generating the compensating growth and job creation expected elsewhere. This is not a knockdown case against free trade, just a case against overconfidence in its incautious application. And the same argument applies to other features of the neoliberal program. It's quite possible that lower tax rates spur growth and innovation when tax rates are cut from 70% highs, but also that a program of permanent upper bracket tax cutting, as practiced by America's Republican Party, won't produce the hoped-for spillover effects among the bottom 95%. It's possible that the initial economic insight that some corporate consolidation could be good for consumers was useful for antitrust decision-making in the 1970s and 80s, but needs to be corrected as monopolies regather. It's possible that a program of deficit reduction and tight money that makes sense when inflation is galloping doesn't make sense when we're closer to deflation. The countries sometimes need a loose monetary policy to fight stagnation, and having a financial overclass too fixated on the perils of a for-now imaginary inflation is a recipe for permanently lower growth. Then, alongside this brief against an overextended neoliberalism, there's a more subtle argument, pushed by the more serious sort. I think I skipped a page here. Sort of liberalism that the neoliberal program hasn't so much pushed too far as pushed in the wrong direction. In this argument, we don't need less deregulation, but a different kind than we have, because incumbents and insiders in the West have captured the sprawling regulatory state and used it to freeze out potential competition. The age of stagnation, according to this theory, is the fruit of what Brink Lindsay of the Niskenson Institute and Stephen Tellez of Johns Hopkins University describe as a captured economy, in which everything from land use rules to exclusionary zoning to occupational licensing to ever-expanding intellectual property protections to corporate subsidies and tax breaks all converge to create a system that's basically the worst of socialism and the worst of capitalism conjoined. Plutocratic and sclerotic, overregulated and undertaxed, with an upper class enriching itself off rents rather than innovation, and a service class that can't advance beyond its station. The overlap between this more libertarian argument and the left-wing critique of neoliberalism is apparent in one of the texts of the post-financial crisis left, French economist Thomas Piketty's 2013 tome Capital in the 21st Century, which mined centuries worth of statistics to argue that capitalism inherently makes the rich richer because returns on capital will always be higher than simple economic growth unless some powerful force intervenes. The forces that intervened in the 20th century were the Great Depression and 2 world wars, which not only provided the impetus for massive government interventions, but destroyed outright a great deal of capitalist wealth.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. 34 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan with us for the hour, taking your calls. Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. David in St. Paul, Minnesota, listening to AM 950 KTNF. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hey, Tom and Mark, thanks for taking my call. Hey, I just want to ask, and as far as like the biggest threat to democracy, I think is the dark money and the influence of money and corporate power. Is there any way of passing a bill or a standalone bill that simply says everything that is donated to a politician must be held accountable? You know, we just had someone donate $1.6 billion to the Federalist Society, and how do we know who's donating or what? You know, like, how do we make this more transparent? I think the American people would also get on board with this. It would be a way of eliminating or just, you know, this corruption and everything else going on in this country. And just be able to hold people accountable that are donating to these groups and let the sun shine in on them. And also, if you don't mind, I want to just inform you that there's the potential of 15,000 union nurses in the Twin Cities area negotiating for contracts right now that potentially might be going on strike. So just so you're aware of that situation in the Twin Cities. So,
that same thing is happening here in Portland, David. Congressman.
Yeah, David, and also the University of Wisconsin Hospital nurses are doing the same thing. They just voted to have a strike next month if the UW Health Board won't negotiate.
Interesting.
So I think, think of people who've been overworked in the last 2.5 years because of COVID who need this more than anything. I hear you. So, David, I agree with you. I think, actually probably the single biggest issue that we have out there that would solve so many other things is if we address campaign finances and ethics. And we do that in H.R. 1. That is the flagship bill that covers everything from campaign finance to ethics to elections. And the best way to get that done is we have to have more than a 50-50 Senate and a 4-seat margin in the House. We passed it with that 4-seat margin, but the Senate rules, again, block the common sense way to get things done with a simple majority. But there is an answer out there. It's H.R. 1. But you're completely right. I mean, almost any issue goes back to the influence of money in politics. There's 15,000 lobbyists in Washington, D.C., 1,500 alone for Big Pharma, and you wonder why we first now are addressing negotiating for prescription drug prices through Medicare. Well, that's exactly why. And I could go through almost any issue area, and this would be the fundamental problem. So I completely appreciate what you're saying, but the best way we do that is elect more people who will help us pass the most comprehensive bill, which is H.R. 1, and we would be a lot better off.
Wanda in Barton, New York. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for your show, the work on your show.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm aware that we are absolutely going to experience a blue ocean event within, they say, by 2035, but by the looks, it could be much sooner than that. And the heating from that should be anywhere from
Are you talking, Wanda, about when all the Arctic ice is gone in the Arctic?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Right. So that heating, 0.5 to 1 degree or Celsius or more, should probably be enough, I would imagine, to heat up and melt the ice cap on the East Siberian Sea Shelf where the massive amount of methane hydrates is. Because, first of all, we're already experiencing the geophysical release of methane from the earth, from wetlands and permafrost that's melting. So, I mean, that kind of seems like
So, Wanda, what's your question?
An inevitability. Well, so that's an inevitability. I mean, we released the methane from the East Siberian Sea Shelf. That's it. We're done.
Right.
And so what,
so what's your question?
How are EVs going to help? How is increasing mining tenfold to eat up the planet out from under our feet to build EVs and windmills? And I mean, yeah, we need to stop fossil fuels, but it doesn't seem like we're doing that at all.
Okay. Thank you, Wanda.
Yeah, Wanda, so I'm not exactly sure where you're getting all your news and the timelines on that, because I've heard different timelines. I'm not exactly sure what you're saying is completely correct, but I can also tell you that, we're doing something by trying to reduce emissions by 20, 30, 40%. the reason all the environmental groups are largely celebrating this bill is because it is significant action. It's the first time we've taken significant action, and you have to do it in various ways. And one of the ways, obviously, is electric vehicles. So also, in addition to the environmental impact it will have, and it will have environmental impact, it also reduces our reliance on things like oil from the Middle East, where it seems like we're often spending a lot of our defense dollars and other things that are a ripple effect of not having good policies. So, you know, I'm not going to go into the specifics of your timeline, because I'm not sure that is the correct timeline that's out there. But what I can tell you is we just passed a very significant bill that's being celebrated by the environmental groups right now. We always have more to do, but this was a huge first step. Help elect more people to get more of those steps, the better off we'll be. And if you have more people who are bought by the energy industry, then we could be in more dire situations. So, you know, I think there's a lot you and many people can do between now and November to try to address the climate even more.
Yeah, if I'm recalling correctly, the United States is the largest emitter of CO2, and I think it's 27% of our emissions are from the transportation sector. I might be wrong on that exact number, but it's pretty huge.
Yeah, so. And it's one of the most easily addressed, right? That's why California is doing what they're going to do by saying no more gas-fueled vehicles by, I think, 2035. And, there's a lot we can do. But I do think when we get to timelines, sometimes there are different assumptions that are out there. And I think some people have some assumptions that aren't widely accepted. And I just want to put that out there. I'm not sure if the numbers that Wanda gave are the most widely accepted.
Bob in Desert Hot Springs, California. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Senator Pocan and Tom, thanks for all you do. My question, Congressman Pocan, for the good of the country and with the downfall of the Republican Party, don't you think it would be wise for us to really start pushing a third party for the good of the country?
Where it's going to come out of, honestly, would be the Republican Party, Bob, because, I agree. It's not a political party anymore. It's a cult of a personality. And there are a lot of disaffected Republicans, including people like Liz Cheney, who's by no stretch anything but conservative, who are upset about it. But that's where the initiative would take. I just think one unique thing to our national history has been the difficulty to have third-party movements rise. I'm not saying it's a good thing, because I look at the parliamentary system sometimes as intriguing on how it can work with coalitions in other countries. I just think there's a kind of a raw pragmatism that it has not been particularly successful in this country, and where it's going to have to be born most likely right now is out of the Republican Party.
Bob in Farnham, Virginia. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hey, good day, gentlemen. Mark, and my condolences on your mom's passing. I'm all in favor of electric vehicles, and I don't know the facts, but I would imagine that the manufacturers are all going to have their own proprietary designs for battery types and connections and whatnot. And I'm fearful that will impede the availability and the advance of these things. It seems like if we had a standardized system for batteries like we do with, C cells and D cells and AAAs, for batteries and small appliances, it would help things a lot. But I don't know if we're going in that direction. And I'll take your comments off here. Thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah, Bob, that's an intriguing question that I'm going to ask some people I know who are very active in the auto industry. However, I've never heard that people are concerned about that right now. So I'm not sure that is something. We do a lot of battery research here in my district and trying to make it so that the lithium batteries don't catch fire as easily, et cetera. And that's never come up as a concern, because they're clearly strong advocates to have EVs and other uses of batteries for solar power. Our own solar cells right now, we don't have a battery because the cost of the battery right now, where we know it's going to drop significantly and be, much more encouraging for people to get solar when those battery costs drop. I have never heard, though, that they're afraid that this is going to impede any kind of ability to produce or to move forward on it. But I will ask that question, Bob. But at least, from my many conversations up to this point, that hasn't been a concern.
Eric in Mill Hall, Pennsylvania. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hello, Congressman Pocan and Tom. This is my first time, and I want to say hi, and I got a question, maybe two, about what Postmaster General DeJoy is doing in our postal service worker jobs in this country. He's consolidating, and he's doing without smaller post offices in my state, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. And I'd like to see what you could do about telling President Biden about getting in two board of governors, two of which leaving in December, about replacing them and getting into boards of governors that will help us oust DeJoy, because he's really ruining the postal service in this country, and it's really concerning.
Yeah, Eric, I hear you. In fact, I'm glad that you are well informed that it's the Postal Board of Governors that makes that decision. That's why he's still in the spot he's at. And we need a few more picks, and we've got that. I think we need one pick, but two of them, like you said, are coming up that hopefully we can reverse course. There's been a number of bad decisions, I think, made by him. Fortunately, when we did a bill earlier this year, we preserved 6-day delivery, in some other areas where we really needed to do that, because organically, Tom, this is probably one of the top 3 issues that, without having any group initiating a campaign, people in my district reach out to me, and I'm sure this is true of every district, because people count on and rely on their postal service, and people are very concerned around DeJoy. So those are that's the way we can do it, is with new appointments that are coming up to the Postal Board of Governors.
That's great. That's great. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. It is Middays with Mark. Pocan.house.gov is his website. You can tweet him at Rep Mark Pocan. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
46 minutes past the hour. Middays with Mark. We'll be right back with your calls for Congressman Pocan. And welcome back. Renee in Minneapolis here on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hi. Thank you so much for both of you. But earlier you sounded so positive about that there will be an indictment with Trump. And I kind of think that he's just kind of the final act of Nixon and Agnew and Cheney and AWOL and GHW. Reagan, I think they all were just setting this guy up. So I don't know. Do you really think that they are going to take him down?
Well, Renee, let me say it this way, maybe is a better way of saying it. I think they're serious about looking at this, and I think a majority of Americans think it's important that you don't say anyone is above the law, and if he's done something that they can prosecute. And don't forget, that's a little different than being correct or not correct on the facts. They have to be able to prosecute and win the prosecution. They should do that. But I think they're more aggressive. I was, 3-4 months ago, you probably heard me on this show saying I was a little worried that Merrick Garland would take the aggressive stance he needs to, the Department of Justice. They appear to be taking that path, and I think that's a good sign. So that's really what I'm saying. I hope I'm not overstating my, the fact that I think something is going to happen, but I think they're taking it seriously. They're moving forward on it, and that is positive, much more positive than I thought 3-4 months ago.
Morris in Long Beach, California. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Man, I'm excited, Congressman, and be honest with me. When you guys take control of the government again, is the Build Back Better plan coming back?
Absolutely, Morris. We are going to continue to work towards that goal. We need a few more senators, and I think we've got, including in my state in Wisconsin, where Mandela Barnes is running, and in Pennsylvania, as well as I think Ohio and North Carolina. There's a number of states where we're seeing some good possibilities to pick up seats. But, I think one of the most important provisions in that Build Back Better, I would love to see us pass, is the child care provisions, limiting the cost of child care to 7% of your income, if you make up to, I think it's $2.5 2.5 times the median income. The reason I'm extra excited, Morris, is because right now, the fact that we did that with student loans and put an income cap, and we did some of that, that's the type of stuff that we're probably going to be doing with the child care. And I know the president's committed to it, and Democrats, that almost every Democrat I know in the House is committed to doing the child care provisions. That paired with the child tax credit would have a huge impact on a lot of families. And there's many other parts of Build Back Better would like to get done. What we need are more people to help move that agenda. 50-50 Senate's always difficult, but I think there may be some help on the way.
Congressman, we have 45 seconds to the break. What are you hearing within your own caucus and from the experts and consultants that every political party has about how things are probably going to shake out this fall? I'm starting to feel really hopeful.
We're getting tailwinds, right? Tailwinds around what the Supreme Court did by stacking it with conservative extremists. They did overreach. Tailwinds on gas going down for the 78th day, I think, in a row. Tailwinds on people caring about democracy as one of the major campaign issues. But there's still the headwinds of inflation in general, the headwinds of the midterm, just historically where it's at, and then the headwinds of gerrymandering. The Senate doesn't have to worry about that. That's why I think we look at some more seats they might be able to pick up there. But for the House, it's going to be a mix of that, the gerrymandering versus these tailwinds. And, I'm hoping that if people get out to vote, we do well. If they don't, then we don't do as well. It's really that simple.
Turn out.
Yep.
There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan with us, taking your calls for the hour on the Thom Hartmann Program, Middays with Mark. We'll be right back with more of your calls for Representative Pocan in just a second. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Before the hour, welcome back. Brian in Albuquerque, New Mexico, listening on KTRC. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Good morning, gentlemen. Pleasure to speak with you. The issue I want to discuss is affordable housing. It's tangential to all the other hot topics we always talk about, like immigration, climate change. There's going to be tens of millions of people moving around the planet in the next 50 to 100 years. So what kind of future are we going to build for our grandchildren? I think the Democratic Party needs to get on this issue. Republicans, of course, are silent, but I like to hear the Democrats talk about how we're going to create a country with affordable housing and incentivize people to move out of all these low-lying areas along the coast. This is going to be a huge issue, and I'd just like to hear your comments on that.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I'm going to just refine it a little bit, Brian, and I hope I'm not answering your question, but I'm not sure about how you're going to get people to move from the coast. That's a whole different issue. But on affordable housing, you're right. We do need to do a lot more. In fact, in many, many communities where we're looking at people being completely priced out. And Maxine Waters has been really an outspoken advocate. She's the chair of the Financial Services Committee in the House of Representatives. She's got a number of, I think, really important proposals out there. Again, bigger majorities, we can get these things done. But if you want to see what Democrats are saying, I would say take a look at some of the things that Maxine Waters has said, because she, I think, has in Congress the best grasp and knowledge on this area.
George in Cripple Creek, Virginia, listening on Sirius XM. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hey, Tom, Congressman. Yeah, I think, do you think it's time we revisited Poland's offers to supply MiG-29 aircraft to Ukraine, since Ukraine has had them in their inventory for decades, could use them immediately?
I'll tell you, George, my biggest concern is that we kind of continue doing what we're doing, supporting the Ukrainian people, but not putting our military in the country and doing things, because I think there's bipartisan support not to do that, and that's a good thing. We don't, I think, need to be directly involved. I do have great concern, though, over some of the bombings near the nuclear facilities right now, and that could initiate some additional conversations, not saying about putting people directly in, but what else we can do. But, we've given quite a strong commitment from the United States in providing that support. Other countries have as well. But my main concern is I don't want U.S. troops there. But I also, now that we have this nuclear situation, we may have to revisit some of the ideas that we can do to be most helpful.
Michael in Bronx, New York, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Greetings, gentlemen. Very important question. I know you've been covering the crimes of Trump, but I don't hear much talk going on regarding Texas governor and Trump loyalist Greg Abbott, with his migrating, busing migrants to New York City and to D.C., two of several U.S. cities that was deemed sanctuary. I find it to be racist to begin with because both New York and D.C. mayors are people of color. But the more concerning question, if I'm not mistaken, doesn't this fall under human trafficking because you're not consulting with the people on the other end in terms of making arrangements, getting their okays, you're just busing them over there. And then the migrants, he's lying to the migrants about what's in for them. And you're going to tell the media that they voluntarily went for this? To me, there's nothing voluntary if you're misleading people about where they're going. I mean, am I not missing something, or did I hit it on the head?
Well, Michael, I do think, I mean, it's interesting what you just said on the human trafficking aspect, if there could be some kind of a tie to that. I'm going to ponder that more. But, you know, one of the things that's interesting about Texas is their governor actually has very little power compared to most governors in most states, which is why I think, you know, honestly, buffoons like Abbott get elected and do the things they do. You know, this is all because he wants to try to get a little attention, so maybe he can run for president. And, you know, unfortunately, the governors I'm most worried about are people like Ron DeSantis, who are doing a lot of really awful things in Florida because he does have power, more power than the governor of Texas has by their state statutes. I hear what you're saying. Let me ponder that a little more about the human trafficking aspect, but you know, the fortunate news is the reason you see these symbolic things sort of coming out of places like Texas is because those governors by state statute don't have a lot of power. When it comes to Abbott, that's a very, very good thing.
We have just about a minute left. Lori in Ocala, Florida. You got a quick one here for Congressman Pocan?
Sure. How about pondering reframing the conception issue and make it, we should introduce a national birth control law for couples or individual people wanting IVF, for men with low motility or erection issues, for women prone to ectopic pregnancies or in need of post-miscarriage care.
Like a national right to this kind of care. Lori, thank you. Question?
Yeah, I mean, Lori, we should just have a national healthcare system and all of this is covered. So you're right if we have to explicitly put it out there. The problem is the reason we have to explicitly govern common sense is because of all the Trumps and the Republicans right now. The best way to honestly deal with that is in 2 months you have an opportunity to be very to have your voice heard through the elections. And I'd say let's work on that because I don't see anything happening between now and the end of the year in Congress at that level, given the majorities. But we, as individuals, can be heard by making sure that we're voting and being active.
There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. Congressman, thanks again so much for dropping by and doing this with us.
Of course, Tom, and I'm glad you're feeling better.
Thank you. Yeah, I am. Thank you. Thank you very much. All righty. Richard Wolff is up next. The American Inflation Act. What's going on with that? Stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air. So you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com.
We take life back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Code Red by E.J. Dionne Jr. It's how progressives and moderates can unite to save our country. This is from the introduction, titled The Opportunity We Dare Not Miss. Will progressives and moderates feud while America burns? Or will these natural allies take advantage of a historic opportunity to strengthen American democracy and defeat an increasingly radical form of conservatism? The choice in our politics is just that stark. This book is offered in a spirit of hope, but with a sense of alarm. My hope is inspired by the broad and principled opposition that Donald Trump's presidency called forth. It is a movement that can and should be the driving force in our politics long after Trump is gone. His abuses of office, his divisiveness, his bigotry, his autocratic habits, and his utter lack of seriousness about the responsibilities of the presidency drew millions of previously disengaged citizens to the public square and the ballot box. The danger he represented inspired young Americans to participate in our public life at unprecedented levels. Tens of thousands of Americans, especially women, have gathered in libraries, diners, and church basements to share wisdom, to organize, and in many cases to run for office themselves. These newly engaged citizens have created an opportunity to build a broad alliance for practical and visionary government, as promising as anything since the Great Depression gave Franklin Roosevelt the chance to build the New Deal coalition. To seize this opening, progressives and moderates must realize that they are allies who have more in common than they sometimes wish to admit. They share a commitment to what public life can achieve and the hope that government can be decent again. They reject the appeals to racism that have been Trump's calling card and the divisiveness at the heart of his electoral strategy. Together, they long for a politics focused on freedom, fairness, and the future. This new politics would be rooted in the economic justice that has always been the left's driving goal, and in the problem-solving approach to government that moderates have long championed. It's true that these camps often battle over whether the nation should seek restoration or transformation in the years after Trump. In fact, our country needs both. To restore the democratic norms we have always valued, we must begin to heal the social and economic wounds that led to Trump's presidency in the first place. Yet there is resistance to common ground among progressives and moderates alike. They often mistrust each other's motives, battle fiercely over tactics, argue over how much change our country needs, and squabble over whether specific policy ideas go too far or not far enough. The moderate says, hey, progressive, you think that if you just lay out the boldest and most ambitious approach to any given problem, the people will rally to your side. Really? For one thing, people may like your objective, but think you're changing things way more than we have to. And we can battle to the death over, say, a Democratic Party platform plank or the first draft of a bill. But without the hard negotiating and compromising that legislative politics requires, a bold idea will remain just a platform plank. That really doesn't do anyone any good. You subject everyone to so many litmus tests that we might as well be in chemistry class. And God save us from your abuse on Twitter if we disagree with you. You lefties have no idea how to win elections outside of Berkeley or Brooklyn, and some of your ideas are so sweeping that they'll scare potential voters away. At this point, the moderate is likely to wield the sturdy old punchline, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. But hold on, says the progressive. You moderates spend so much time negotiating with yourselves that you compromise away goals and priorities before the real battle even begins. Your ideas get so soggy and complicated that they mobilize no one and mostly put people to sleep. Better to have the courage of your convictions, lay out your hopes plainly and passionately, and inspire voters before to join in. Besides, you middle-of-the-roaders were so petrified of Ronald Reagan and the right wing that you caved into the Gipper's economic ideas, let inequality run wild, and gave us a racist and grossly unfair criminal justice system. The extremists have pulled the political center so far right that the only way back to sanity is to show our fellow citizens what a real progressive program looks like. At the risk of sounding like a perhaps unwelcome counselor attempting to ease a family quarrel, I would plead with moderates and progressives to listen to each other carefully. If the events since 2016 do not teach moderates and progressives that they must find ways of working together, nothing will. If they fail to heed each other's advice and take each other's concerns seriously, they will surrender the political system to an increasingly undemocratic right with no interest in any of their shared goals, priorities, and commitments. Moderates are right about the complexity of getting things done in a democracy. Even when the boldest ideas have prevailed, they did so because complex coalitions were built. Important, and it should be said often legitimate, interests were accommodated, and some lesser goals were left by the wayside to be fought for another day. Moderates are also right that democracy requires persuading those who are open to change but worry about how this or that reform might work in practice or affect them personally. Think losing their private health insurance. Disdaining as sellouts those who raise inconvenient questions or express qualms is not the way to build a majority for reform. Moderates are also right that Americans in large number are tired of politics that involves more yelling than dialogue, more demonizing than understanding. But progressives are right to say that for the last 3 decades, moderates have spent too much time negotiating with themselves. Consider all the effort Democrats put into wooing Republicans by responding to their proposals to amend Obamacare. The book Code Red by E.J. Dionne Jr.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of our program. On the line with us, Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author of numerous books, including his most recent, The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, also available as an ebook. He's also the host of the Economic Update with Professor Richard Wolff right here on Free Speech TV. Democracyatwork.info, Prof. Wolff, P-R-O-F, Wolff with 2 F's on Twitter. Professor Wolff, welcome back to the program. The American Inflation Act, which is along with the CHIPS Act and along with the bipartisan infrastructure bill, all of them basically large subsidy programs, a lot of it through tax breaks and things like that, are causing just an explosion of announcements from companies: Honda, LG Energy, General Motors, Ford, Toyota. Let's see, the list just goes on. Corning, Micron, Qualcomm. They're all building like literally multi-billion-dollar factories, thousands of jobs all across the United States. This seems, broadly speaking, like a good thing, and that bringing jobs back home or building jobs here would be a good thing. Although we still haven't changed our tariff policies or our trade policies in any consequential way. So there's an awful lot of manufacturing still being done, in China, which is threatening to go to war with us over Taiwan. I'm curious your thoughts on all this. And also over at CEPR, they just had a piece that they just published about how the unemployment claims are starting to inch back up again. It looks like maybe Jerome Powell's efforts to induce a recession are working. What are your thoughts on this, kind of globally on this whole larger issue here? And do you want to break that down into pieces?
Okay, yeah, let me tell you that my theme, which I hope doesn't depress folks, is enormous grain of salt here. I mean, lots of skepticism. Every one of the last 7 or 8 presidents of the United States, either during his campaign or his or her campaign or once in office, has made grandiose promises about bringing jobs back to the United States, bringing manufacturing jobs. And every one of those presidents presided over exactly the opposite. In other words, what actually happened was a continuing decline of manufacturing jobs and a continuing decline of good jobs. And by that, I mean jobs that have more than an average level of income and wage and salary, and more than the average level of benefits to go with it. So lots of talk. That talk is ratcheting up now. You're quite right, Tom. It's mostly about and from companies that are getting huge, fat subsidies, tax breaks, incentive programs to do exactly that. I don't want to minimize that there is a giving up of the globalist image, the notion that the United States was the advance guard of a free trade world and that we would globalize and we would all be better off. It was never the truth. It was mostly hype. But there is an indication now that the United States and Western Europe have switched their focus and are now going to do what they always do, but do it in a nationalistic way rather than in a globalized way, which is part of why the tariffs on China haven't gone away. The second thing to understand here is that the most ambitious notion of how many jobs were created over the last year in this country comes to about 350,000 jobs. And that's an impressive number. But the number that you ought to keep in mind is the amount of loss of jobs that are expected over the next 2 years just from the raising of interest rates that Mr. Powell and the Federal Reserve are committed to. The estimates there run from 2 to 5 million. So rough numbers, yes, and that includes all the major estimators. So that's 10 times the number of lost jobs compared to what the last year has achieved in terms of jobs here. It suggests that a government that was concerned with employment might be really better served taking the tens of billions of dollars in those three laws just passed that you referenced and developing them for a program of public jobs or other kinds of work arrangements, which would be much more important for the American people, given what has been promised to them by their own leaders, such as Mr. Powell, and the obvious support he gets from Mr. Biden. Look, here's the reality. Our unemployment numbers are low, but that's because we are paying lower wages than we have before. Look at just this last year. Average wage increase, 5%. Average price increase between 8 and 9%, and that's a conservative estimate. That means that the real cost to companies has gone down for the labor force they sustain. They're able to raise their prices on average 8.5%, but they only have to pay their workers much less of an increase, 5%. That boosts the profits. And if you add to that whatever productivity gains they're getting from automation and technology and artificial intelligence, well, then it continues to be a banner year for profitability, which, by the way, all the statistics about U.S. corporate profits indicate. So I'm afraid my skepticism leads me to the notion, A, the number of jobs coming back is not what it is hyped up to be. Number two, other economic realities are honing in on the American economy in a way that ought to make the government much less busy hyping what it does do in subsidies to corporations and much busier doing something for the millions of people it is itself proposing to render unemployed. Remember in his last speech that Jerome Powell talked about the pain to American households that what he is doing will bring, and how sorry he is that that is the case. Wow. I mean, you can be more than sorry if you're willing to give, literally hundreds of billions to corporations for a fairly modest improvement, while you don't give anything comparable to what you are bringing down on the heads of the working class. Well, then, your earlier commentary on people being upset, and rightly so, and going to the left and the right, rightly so, in their desperate determination to try in some way to undo all of this. And here's a last point. If you bring jobs back to the United States, even with a decline in real wages in this country over the last 30 years, it's still the case that Americans get paid more than other parts of the world, which means if you bring your manufacturing here, you're going to have to price it higher because you're paying much higher wages. And that means you're going to be in competition with other countries that are not experiencing the price inflation that we are, whose prices are not rising. Let me leave you with one statistic. The inflation rate over the last few years, and including right now as I speak, in the People's Republic of China is 2%, not 8 to 9%. And the world is an economy that is looking around to buy wherever the prices are cheapest. And we are pricing ourselves out of the world economy in large part by the kinds of policies both private enterprises and the government are pursuing.
Fascinating. Professor Richard Wolff, democracyatwork.info, Prof. Wolff over on Twitter. Professor Wolff, thank you so much for dropping by.
My pleasure. Thank you, Tom.
Always great talking with you. We'll be right back. I want to tell you the story of the Senate, how Republicans packed the Senate in the 19th century, and how Democrats need to do it, assuming that they can hold on to the Senate right after the next election. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 15 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with my rant, and then we'll be picking up your phone calls. And welcome back, Lowell in Salem, Oregon. Hey, Lowell, what's on your mind?
Hello, Tom. And I wanted to talk about the need for a Medicare for all or Medicare waiver to allow the states to create a state-run universal health care program.
Right.
Now, currently, Medicare for all is blocked by Congressman Richard Neal, who Nancy Pelosi put as chair of the Ways and Means Committee. He's one of those ultra-conservative New Dems. Mm-hmm. So he hates Medicare for all. So he won't allow that to pass. So I think the Progressive Caucus needs to put together an alternate strategy as well, you know, a multi-pronged approach, and pass a Medicare for all waiver.
I agree.
Or Medicare waiver to allow states to do this. Now, where's the pressure? I don't see, I didn't hear any talk from Mark Pocan or anybody on that. So is there a way to get them to have that as a priority?
Well, I don't think anybody called him and asked him that specific question. So I don't know what he would have said in answer to it. But I do know that there is a lot of talk among progressives in Congress about getting these waivers passed. And yeah, we've got some problems with some of the conservatives in the House. You know, there's no magic bullet here, Lowell. It's just going to take a lot of us getting out there and voting more and more progressives in.
Or having a call to have the chair, Richard Neal, replaced on the Ways and Means Committee, because that is entirely within the Speaker of the House's power.
That's interesting. Yeah, in fact, that might even be a good topic to write a rant about, to write an op-ed about. Lowell, thanks. Thanks for putting that on my radar screen. I appreciate the call. Steve in Lake Oswego, Oregon. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hello, Tom. Good to hear that you're on the mend.
Thank you.
I was calling in the previous hour. You had talked about electric cars and the availability and affordability, and I wanted to make you aware of last week in Nature magazine, they had an article about Massachusetts Institute of Technology is developing a new form of rechargeable battery, no longer using the lithium-ion battery with all of its problems as far as cost and flammability and difficult sources, material coming from China and other hostile countries. They are developing a new rechargeable battery that is a aluminum sulfur battery with a.
I read about it.
With a yes, and I just wanted to make you aware of it and push that to next time that Ro Khanna or Congressman Pocan is on to push these funding, push this for availability, kind of mass producing these types of technologies, domestically sourced materials, and in the U.S. rather than relying on other countries for are rechargeable batteries.
Yeah, I think this
so I
is.
just wanted to make you aware of that.
Yeah, well, thank you, and well done, Steve. I think this is one of the reasons also why it's such a great thing that the federal government is actually promoting and subsidizing electric vehicles. If you look at photovoltaic cells, their cost dropped over 93% over I think a 15-year period. I mean, it was just dramatic, because they started being used at scale, in part because of subsidies, in part because, we were getting federal tax credits for years. And I think we're going to see the same thing with EVs and these technologies. There's also these giant, very, very large iron-based batteries now that they're working with for as backup storage for entire neighborhoods or for houses. So there's all kinds of really cool battery stuff on the horizon. Steve, thank you for that. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So if you want to know what the Republicans are for, you'll recall, President Biden recently in his one-year anniversary of becoming president speech said that, who would have imagined that all they were in favor of doing was just obstructing anything I'm doing. And then he went on to say, what are the Republicans for? What does Mitch McConnell stand for? Chris Sununu, the governor of New Hampshire, actually went and talked with a number of Republican senators when he was thinking about running for the Senate, asked them, what are you guys doing? And they said, we're just here basically obstructing Biden. That's all we're doing. And Sununu said, screw that. I'm not going to run for the Senate then. He said they were all, for the most part, content with the speed at which they weren't doing anything. It bothered me that they were okay with that. So then, Mitch McConnell got asked by an NBC, Leanne Caldwell at NBC, what are you guys going to do if you get elected? And McConnell said, I'll tell you after the election. This is nuts. We got a video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. So my op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com is titled, "The Senate is 50-50, yet America is not, and this is a democracy." And, I started out by ranting about how I keep hearing that, I started out by pointing out that 3 Republican presidents did it in every case to hold on to a Republican Senate. Lincoln did it, Grant did it, Harrison did it, and it's getting time for Biden to do it. And then I get into this rant about how, on the weekend I heard Mitch McConnell on TV going, well, we've got a 50-50 Senate right now. We've got a 50-50 nation, which is, of course, a lie. Yes, the Senate's 50-50, but the nation's not 50-50. And then Sunday morning, I was listening to NPR when I was getting dressed, and I was hearing this, I believe it was a news report, and the guy he was talking to said, well, America is a 50-50 nation. And I was waiting for somebody to push back, and nobody ever did. And then an hour later, I heard it again, this time on CNN. In fact, it provoked me to tweet about this. Again, America is a 50-50 nation. This is the new Republican meme. And basically what they're trying to say is, don't get upset about McConnell and the GOP as obstruction. When half the country doesn't want something and it deadlocks the Congress, that's the way things are supposed to work. So get over it. Just shut up and go watch HBO. But, the reality is no. The reality is that the Senate is 50-50 because California has 40 million people and Wyoming has has about 500,000, I believe, just a little over 500,000. And they both have 2 senators. I mean, that is the bottom line. The 10 most populous states have 164 million people, but control only 10% of the Senate. And the 10 least populous states, which also control 10% of the Senate, only have 7.9 million people. 42 senators today represent 21 states whose aggregate total populations are smaller than the population of California. And California has only 2 senators. 42 senators equal California. There's something very wrong with this. Now, in the past, we have had, and so, my solution to this, what I'm suggesting, I give you the punchline here at the beginning, is that we add immediately Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico as states, and ideally the U.S. Virgin Islands. So that gives us 3 new states, 6 new senators, 6 new members of the House of Representatives, and maybe even 7 based in the House, based on, 3 new members of the House, maybe even 4 based on the population of Puerto Rico. But this is something that has an extraordinary history that I don't think most Democrats are aware of. When Abraham Lincoln was president, during the Civil War, in 1864, he and the Republicans controlled Congress. Now, to add a state, there's only three things necessary. The people in the territory that is not yet the state have to have a referendum. They have to have a vote saying, yes, we want to be a state, majority of them. And then the House and Senate have to vote on it, and it's a simple majority bill. It's a simple majority legislation, and then the president signs it into law. When Lincoln was president, he needed 2 more senators because he saw after the war, as the Democratic Southern states came back online, he saw the Republican Party losing control of the Senate. Did not want that to happen. So he reached out to Nevada. Now, at that time, it took 125,000 people to produce 1 member of the House of Representatives. I think right now it's in the neighborhood of 500,000 or 600,000. But basically, 1 member of the House of Representatives for 100,000 people, 125,000 people. Nevada only had 7,000 people. Nevada didn't hit that 125,000 population that would have made them eligible for statehood until 1970. And yet, in 1864, Lincoln made them a state. Why? Because he wanted to increase the number of Republicans in the Senate. 12 years later, in 1876, the Republicans were again in danger of losing the Senate. Again, you know, as Democratic states were rejoining the Union after the Civil War. And so to solidify that, Ulysses S. Grant, again, the threshold for citizenship was 125,000 citizens then, too. Colorado only had 40,000 people, but Ulysses Grant made Colorado a state to get 2 more Republican senators. And then, again, this happened, you know, a couple of years later when, after Grover Cleveland lost in 1889, Republican President Benjamin Harrison not only admitted the Dakota Territory, and by the way, it used to be called the Dakota Territory. It had a total population of about 135,000. But he split it, and keep in mind it took 125,000 to be a state, but he split it in half to get 2 states, North Dakota and South Dakota. This was done by a Republican president and a Republican Congress just to get 4 new senators. No other reason. And so he split it into, and North Dakota ended up with 36,000 people. In the census of 1880, South Dakota had 98,000. And so Benjamin Harrison got 4 more Republican senators. And that allowed the Republicans, with the exception of a 6-year period, from the end of the Civil War until the election of Franklin Roosevelt in 1933, the Republicans pretty much, other than those 6 years, literally controlled the Senate all that time, with the exception of those 6 years. In my opinion, it's time for Democrats to start talking about this. It's time for Democrats to start planning for this. We need to add at least 2 and ideally 3 new states. There is ample precedent for this. It has been done before. It has been done before for purely political purposes. This isn't like, you know, when we added Hawaii and Alaska that both easily had large enough populations, both had, you know, voted for both Republicans and Democrats. That was all done under Eisenhower. It was not a partisan move. But hey, you know, Washington, D.C. has more residents, more people who live in Washington, D.C., who pay their taxes than does Wyoming or Vermont. And Puerto Rico has a lot more people than Wyoming or Vermont or a number of other states. So let's make the U.S. Virgin Islands has, you know, 150,000 people. So let's make them states.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And my final question, what do you think about the idea of calling your local bar and saying, here's my credit card, when Trump gets indicted, drinks on the house?
Our book today is Future War, Preparing for the New Global Battlefield by Robert, I believe it's pronounced Latif, L-A-T-I-F-F. This is from the introduction. On a sweltering August day following weeks of heightened tension with Russia over its actions in Ukraine and Syria, and harsh words between the United States and China over actions in the South China Sea, and as workers are preparing to depart the cool of their air-conditioned Manhattan office buildings for the gridlocked highways and subways, Several large electric power plants along the East Coast simultaneously experienced dramatic overspeed conditions in their large turbine generators. Plant operators are unable to stop the steam turbines, whose automatic control and data systems have been infected by sophisticated computer malware, and they catastrophically tear themselves apart, cutting power to large segments of the population and industries in the Northeast. Building systems shut down, hospitals switch to emergency generators, trains stop running, traffic lights cease operating, and Wall Street trading comes to a halt. At the same time, 1,100 miles to the south, a massive rocket sits fueled and ready to launch a critical national security satellite when an explosive-laden private aircraft flies at low altitude into the Cape Canaveral launch pad area and, despite repeated warnings, slams into the pressurized fuel tank and solid rocket motors, creating an enormous conflagration. Half a world away, elite commandos equipped with the latest high-technology equipment but unidentifiable as a national army attack U.S. and allied interests near areas of disputed territory. Thus are fired the opening shots of a new war. These hypothetical events represent a radically different style of conflict fought with new tools and against new and unfamiliar enemies. When most people think of war, they imagine soldiers doing battle with other soldiers, employing tanks, artillery, and other recognizable weapons. However, in this century, war has morphed into something we can scarcely recognize, and future conflicts will be qualitatively and quantitatively unlike those of the past. They will be fought using innovative and unusual weapons, many of which, because the technologies have both civilian and military uses, will be available to far more people who are far less skilled in their employment. The so-called democratization of technology has diminished the monopoly of advanced countries on the tools of war. 21st century armed conflicts often have no battlefield in the traditional sense. The concept of opposing armies clashing in deadly struggle but moderated by international conventions of behavior seems a thing of the past. In 1999, Chinese colonels Kuo Liang and Wang Shuangshui predicted that soldiers would increasingly be computer hackers, financiers, drug smugglers, and agents of private corporations rather than members of a military, and that their weapons would include not only airplanes, cannons, poison gas bombs, and biochemical agents, but also computer viruses, net browsers, and financial derivative tools. Their predictions were prescient. Yesterday's wars were, like World War II, about saving civilized nations from maniacal dictators, or like the conflicts in Vietnam and Korea, devoted to a clash of ideologies in the attempt to limit the spread of one hegemon over another. They were big affairs involving large military forces and enormous violence. Today's wars are more about cultural and religious hatreds, using violence as a means to change the hearts and minds of people, among whom the killing occurs with more frequency. Tomorrow's wars will be different still, fought largely for political dominance with stealth and cunning, targeting innocents and institutions, heavily dependent on information superiority, and employing strange new weapons. While we have a highly motivated and well-trained and equipped armed forces that will adapt, we are not prepared as a nation to react well to the inevitably messy and ambiguous situations these new conflicts and weapons will present. We still have no clear idea of what constitutes an act of war in cyberspace now, nor of how we might respond to such an act. It is not enough for the military to be prepared. Neither the public nor its decision makers have yet fully comprehended the significance of the changes in the types of conflict and the tools with which they will be fought. Without question, there will be circumstances when decision makers will find it necessary, or at least think it necessary, to send soldiers into classic boots-on-the-ground combat situations. We will continue to project force with our powerful aircraft, our munitions, and our aircraft carrier strike groups. When war is fought in foreign lands, it could well be against other high-tech armies. However, war will increasingly be more personal and often fought closer to home. It will not lend itself to the traditional massive displays of U.S. firepower. It will affect individuals directly, not as some distant conflict we read about in newspapers or watch in the movies or on the internet. Americans will be targeted on U.S. soil, often, as we have seen in San Bernardino and Orlando, by homegrown terrorists. This form of war will be messy and complex, and it will not lend itself to easy, quick, soundbite solutions. It may not even be clear for a while who perpetrated the violence against us. Was it state-sponsored or a random act of terror? Will we unleash massive destruction on foreign countries in retaliation for attacks by terrorists residing on our own soil? If so, to what end and with what consequences? There are always consequences, whether they be the death or capture of our own troops, unnecessary civilian casualties, or the incitement of more violence. The book Future War by Robert Latif. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program.
Hey, just wanted to flag for you this amazing study that came out of the Department of Global Public Health at the University of Bergen in Norway. Lars Fadnes is the professor who oversaw it. They took a massive database of millions and millions of people all around the world, and the goal was to look at life expectancy. And they were looking at everything from pollution to wars to poverty to diet. And because there was so much data and such a large population base, they were able to separate out individual pieces. And what they found, and just looking at the diet piece of this, what they found was that going with what you and I might call the Mediterranean diet, they don't call it that in the study. What they basically say is no red meat, very little dairy, lots of fish, nuts, legumes as the principal protein sources, and lots and lots and lots of fresh fruits and veggies would add 10 years of lifespan to the typical 20-year-old and 8 years of lifespan to the typical 60-year-old. The whole video about it is over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. 35 minutes past the hour. Wow, a lot going on. So what do you think of this idea? I mean, I thought it was a really cool idea. I don't know if, and I realize that most people can't afford to, suddenly have a $500 bar bill, appear on their credit card. But there are people who can afford that. And wouldn't it be cool if all across the country, the TIPS program, now what does your acronym stand for, Sean? The Trump indictment parties, right? Everybody just call one bar near them and say, when Trump is indicted, it's drinks on the house and charge it on my credit card. You don't have to mention my name. If we could get this thing going, and it would be the perfect, rejoinder, I think, to Lindsey Graham saying, oh, no, there's going to be riots in the streets and, people are going to be killing each other. All that kind of crazy stuff. By the way, the Starbucks union-busting CEO, Howard Schultz, made during the pandemic, who is fighting unionization at Starbucks, doesn't want to pay his workers more, made $940 million during the pandemic. Just this one guy, $940 million, $1 million, 940 times, 940. Yeah, it's just breathtaking. They netted $4.1 billion in pre-tax profits last year. Kevin Johnson, the CEO, got $20 million in compensation last year, a bump of nearly $5 million. This is just amazing. The personal pandemic wealth gain of Howard Schultz was enough to give a $3,800 bonus to every Starbucks employee in the entire country, in the entire world. And, instead, Schultz is saying, yeah, we'll give a 5% raise to people who promise not to unionize. I think that's illegal. But then, Trump gutted the staff of the National Labor Relations Board, so they're not enforcing the laws anymore. Hopefully those will be restored soon. Anyhow, let me pick up your phone calls and get your thoughts on all this stuff. Britt in Eureka, California. Hey, Britt, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for having me on. Hey, I wanted to point out, I know that this whole issue of saving democracy is very important, and certainly that's going to be probably one of the big defining issues for the midterms this fall. But I wanted to point out that there is actually a bigger issue that I think Joe Biden and other Democrats could push, and it's actually a little bit more important than saving democracy. It's called saving the planet. And I really think that with the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed and that has all of the climate provisions in it, I really think Biden could make some probably get some additional positive backing and maybe get some additional support from Democrats if he could go out there and really push the climate provisions that he's put into that bill and the difference that the climate provisions are going to make. I think that Americans and people around the world, certainly in Pakistan and other places, can now see the direct effects of climate change on our weather and how our weather is really kind of, de-evolving to very stochastic and random events that are devastating to the planet. I think Joe should get out there and really push how they're going to make changes in, American, manufacturing and the use of cars and transportation to make some big inroads towards climate change.
Yeah, I'm with you. And frankly, I suspect that a lot of that's going to be happening. The president's going to give a speech. It's tonight or tomorrow night. I think it's going to be, I saw a headline about it, about the state of democracy. And I doubt he'll get into climate in that context. But yeah, there's a lot going on right now, Britt, and I'm fairly optimistic that we're going to see some positive stuff coming out of this. So I think your points are all very well taken. Thanks for the call. Rob in Orlando. Hey, Rob, what's on your mind today?
Yes, Tom, thanks for taking my call. If you get rid of all the gas-powered vehicles in California and stop selling gas-powered vehicles, how is the power grid going to be able to withstand all these electric cars
easily
that'll
easily
be driving
easily?
Okay.
Charging an electric car using the 110 volt chargers is basically like plugging in a hairdryer. I mean, it draws about the same amount of power, about 1,200 watts or so, and your house can easily handle that. Your power grid can easily handle that, and it takes you, depending on the capacity of your car, it takes my car about 4 hours to charge. That's for a 30-mile drive, with one of these only 110 volt chargers. If you had a 300-mile range, my daughter had one of those cars for a while. It takes overnight. And she only had to charge it 1 day a week, right? It would take a week to go through those 300 miles. So you're only running that hairdryer for 10, 12 hours, once a week or so. You're doing it in your house. Most of our houses were built, and most of our power grids were built and designed back in the 70s and 80s when we were using 100-watt incandescent light bulbs. We're now replacing those with 4, 5, and 6-watt LED bulbs. And so, our houses have a whole lot more electrical capacity, and our grid has a whole lot more electrical capacity than we are using now compared to just 10, 15 years ago because of this transition to LED bulbs. And also refrigerators now use half as much power as they used to. So I don't see that there's going to be any consequence at all. I have several friends who live in California who have electric cars and have shared with me the exact same experience I'm seeing, which is I see no difference in my electric bill from plugging my car in, and I plug my car in every couple days because it only has a 30-mile range. But it's just running the hairdryer for 3 or 4 hours. So I don't think that it's going to have any impact at all, Rob. I think that if you look at how often how often do you fill your car up? I mean, typically people do that every 2
I'm an
weeks.
Uber driver, so I'm an Uber driver, so I fill up almost every day.
Yeah, well, you're the exception to the rule then. But
yeah.
I really don't think that this is going to require any additional infrastructure. I know that there are people saying that it will, and I have not been able to make any sense out of the math that says that we have to build out more. We have to supply our homes with more power. Keep in mind, most people are not going to be charging their cars at charging stations. They're going to be doing it at home. And most homes have all kinds of excess electric capacity, and particularly if you're charging overnight. If you're charging overnight, that's the time when the demand on the grid is the lowest. The demand on the grid is highest during the day when people have appliances on, they have lights on, they have the air conditioning on. At night, in fact, my electric company gives me a discount on electricity overnight. So if I charge my car overnight, it's even cheaper. Although, like I said, it uses so little electricity, I've not been able to notice it on my bill. So I think it's a non-issue, Rob. Thanks for the call. It's a good question. Jessica in Chicago. Hey, Jessica, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. You're brilliant. I love, as usual, tips is an awesome idea. Absolutely love your tweet. And I'm so ready to celebrate treasonous Trump's indictment, too.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
Me too.
And I just wanted to say, I'm surprised there weren't dirty footprints all over our country's top secret documents.
I think metaphorically there are.
Yeah. treasonous Trump is such a disgrace to America. And then Trump tweets, well, I didn't put them on the floor. And the thing is, the FBI marked those with a crime marker, so you know they found them that way.
Yeah.
And I think treasonous Trump needs to be fitted for an ankle monitor now. Trump should be under house arrest now, the big traitor, and I'd be satisfied with bars on his bedroom window and door and his ankle monitor to start with, because I'm calling Merrick Garland today and saying the majority of Americans are wishing for treasonous Trump's indictment soon.
Yeah, I'm with you, Jessica. I don't know if you caught it, but on Sunday, the Washington Post published a story that now it's out that during his presidency, for the entire 4 years of his presidency, Trump frequently carried top secret documents with him when he traveled overseas, particularly to places like Russia and Saudi Arabia, and left them unattended in hotel rooms. Now, this is a great way to hand off top secret documents to people like Putin and MBS, for which they will then give you billions of dollars or help you out. And then Michael Cohen yesterday came out and said that he was confident, and keep in mind, he was Trump's lawyer during this time, that he was confident that Trump was doing this as a way of handing off those top secret documents.
Yes, and you asked, and I always wish I could answer you when you ask a question. I believe the Flynn brothers helped him decide a few documents to pack.
I'm very obviously Michael Flynn is just a screaming right-wing fascist. Whether his brother Charles is or not, he was in on that call where they decided not to send the National Guard to help on January 6th. Because it would look bad, right? It didn't look bad when it was BLM, but it would look bad when it's right-wingers. It's a problem.
They're all for taking down countries.
There you go. Jessica, thank you. Thank you for the call. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment, helping you win the water cooler wars. I'm Thom Hartmann. And welcome back. Jim in Atlanta, Michigan. Hey, Jim, I didn't recall there was an Atlanta, Michigan. Where is that?
That's, you know where Gaylord's at?
I do. I've been there.
And Alpena, so we're halfway between.
Oh, okay. I know that area.
Right on M32.
Yeah, okay, great. So what's up, Jim?
Well, it was about these Advantage plans. The wife, who was the smart one of the bunch, knew they were a scam from day one. And we're 73 and retired, so I was wondering, because we found out that a lot of people did get sucked in with this, and they've tried to go back to Medicare, and it's hard to do it, and there's a lot of penalties, and it costs a lot of money.
Yep.
I'm just wondering if there's maybe some way to ease some of these penalties so these people can get back in, and that would take some of that money back from the insurance companies and maybe bring it back into the Medicare.
That's a really good question, and Mark Pocan and Ro Khanna are working on legislation to make it so that private health insurance companies can no longer call their Medicare Advantage programs Medicare, that they would simply have to call them like senior care. They'd have to come up with a whole brand new brand name for them to compete with Medicare.
We get 3, 4, or 5 calls a day about it.
Oh, God. And so, adding what you just suggested to that is a really good idea, and I'm going to drop them a note about that, because it's, making it easier for people to leave Medicare Advantage and go back to real Medicare.
Once they realize they've been had.
Yeah, then it's a challenge. I'm with you. That's a great one. Jim, thank you very much for that, and nice to hear from you. Earl in Hyde Park, Illinois. Hey, Earl, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thank you for taking my call, and I want to keep it in the same vein with the environmental thing. Mm-hmm. From time to time, we've talked about the environment and how dire it might be. And I recently was involved in the conversation where it was discussed that Iceland is melting twice as fast as originally thought that it would.
In the Arctic, yes.
Yes. And
the glaciers, too, all around the world.
Right. But one of the things I wanted to bring up, besides that, is scientists have been calling this period that we're in another global die-off, as dire as some of the other four that preceded this time period. And remember when Trump wanted to buy Greenland or Iceland? I can't remember which one.
Yeah.
Greenland. And because of the mineral rights and all that other stuff. And I'm thinking that somewhere in one of the conversations that he might have had around the White House, it was discussed that all of the mineral rights that were there, and he wanted to get in on the ground floor of purchasing Greenland so that we would, have those mineral rights and, possibly for he and his buddies to even ingratiate themselves with more money.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm kind of scared that I'm going to hang up. I'm kind of scared that we really are underestimating how bad the situation is with this climate because of the Republicans dragging their feet with their, allegiance to the coal.
And because for 50 years now, the oil and fossil fuel industry has been lying to us, to legislators. They continue to sponsor these lies. Yeah, I'm with you, Earl, excuse me. And I do think it's worse than most people realize, and I am very concerned about it. I don't think that we're yet to the point where humanity is doomed, but we are certainly facing serious consequences. Earl, thank you for the call. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. So how do you know which party has the most crooks in it? You know, the Republicans are always saying, oh, those Democrats are soft on crime and, a lot of murders in Democrat-run cities. Well, for the record, first off, red states and red counties have a higher per capita murder rates than do blue states and blue counties. This is just a fact. But secondly, let's look at some of the administrations. I mean, the Obama administration had no criminal indictments. The Jimmy Carter administration had 1. The Bill Clinton administration had 2. But what about the Republican administrations? It was 16 for George W. Bush. It was 26 criminal indictments for Ronald Reagan. Richard Nixon's administration had 76 criminal indictments. And of course, the full-time professional rapist and grifter, Donald Trump, he had 215 criminal indictments. So who's really soft on crime? We got a video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. You can check it out. Welcome back. Picking up your calls. Beth in Valparaiso, Indiana. Hey, Beth, what's up?
Yes, the Vale of Paradise, Valparaiso.
Oh, really?
Hardly, but it's still it's a good town. Anyway, I just wanted to echo something that at the end of the day yesterday, a guy called up and said something that he feared some kind of a false flag operation being blamed on the left, kind of a Reichstag moment sort of a thing happening in our country in the near future. And I wanted to echo that because, these guys, everyone in the country knows that the radical right are the ones that are violent and most prone to violence, and the Republican Party's openly accepted violence as a means of political change, as long as you're a Trump supporter.
Right.
And that's just a fact. You can't support the Constitution and Trump at the same time. So we know what they're capable of, and I think since there's now so much noise throughout all of the media about the potential for violence, thanks to what they said yesterday, what these U.S. senators said, I think there's every possibility that they are going to pull some kind of a violent incident and blame the left and have somebody ready to blame. And I think people should watch out for that. That's the main thing I wanted to say. The second thing I wanted to say, too, is that I love hearing from some of your great callers. I love Paul from Woodinville, Washington. I love Dave from Federal Way. And I love Azalee and so many people that call in this show. And I would be curious to see what, Dave, for example, who's an intelligence guy what he would have to say about something like that, or Malcolm Nance if you ever get him on the show, or someone like that.
Malcolm will be on the last half hour of the show today.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Well, I'm purely curious about it, and I'm fearful of it, and I'm thinking of ways to prevent it. And I do hope, by the way, that all the young and old organizers, the people that go out there, when you're at a protest, that's not your opportunity to personally vent your anger. It's not. It's not a creative situation. You're part of something. You're part of a beautiful thing that is changing the world, and so you have to use your own self-discipline. Don't yell at other people while you're out there. That's verbal violence. Don't break anything. That's property damage violence. That's property violence. And obviously, do not engage in any physical violence. If we don't do that, believe me, they'll blame us, and the regular tax-paying citizen sitting at home will say, somebody stop it.
I don't think it's going to work anymore, Beth. You know, they tried to blame January 6th on Antifa and BLM, and then they realized there were no black people there. So it must be Antifa. It must be those, white radical. Turns out, nobody's buying their shtick anymore. And there's enough people with cell phones, and social media is hot enough, fast enough, rapid response enough.
You're right.
I think you're absolutely right that they will try it and have been continuously now for some time, and they'll have all their hysterical memes on Facebook and whatnot. But I just don't think they're going to get away with it. Beth, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Mark in Mineola, Texas. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, love the show.
Thank you.
I just thought I would make people aware they're moving the battleship Texas today to Galveston to dry dock.
That's like a 100-year-old ship, isn't it?
117 years old. It's the first time it's floated since 1988. There are a lot of people gathered along the route to view the ship.
Uh-huh.
There are a lot of live feed. You can go, just Google, moving battleship Texas.
Is this still a commissioned battleship, or has it been
No.
It's been a museum kind of thing for a long time, hasn't it?
Yes, sir. It's they're right there at the San Jacinto Monument, which is actually taller than the Washington Monument.
Huh.
And it's on the battlefield. I don't know how familiar you are with Texas history, but that's where Sam Houston defeated Santa Anna.
Oh, interesting. No, I didn't know that. I'm not that familiar with Texas history. I'm sorry.
And Texas gained their independence from Mexico. It's a pretty cool place. But anyway, they're moving the battleship for the first time in years.
I'm assuming that tugs are pulling it rather than it's going under its own power?
Yes, sir. Tugs are pulling it. And the live feed is really cool. Texas finally, I'm the last Democrat in Texas. I don't remember.
You and Beto O'Rourke. No, I think actually there's a whole bunch of them popping up.
Go Beto, yeah.
Yeah. Is your sense that Beto is going to have a good chance this fall?
He's got a chance. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. Good guy. I agree with him just about on all of his issues, gun issues, everything else.
And the governor has not yet removed your name from the voting rolls? You've been checking your voter registration?
I don't know. I haven't checked.
Oh, well, it might be a good idea.
Not.
Might be a good idea.
Not.
Yeah.
Texas finally did something right and ponied up $35 million to take it down to Galveston and get it restored. So just thought I'd let people know it's live feed. It's really cool.
Okay, Mark, thanks a lot for the call. Fascinating stuff. We'll be back. We'll continue our conversation. I want to tell you the real story of Mikhail Gorbachev. There's a lot of kind of reinvented history going on. I'll share that with you right after the break. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today is Future War, Preparing for the New Global Battlefield by Robert, I believe it's pronounced Latif, L-A-T-I-F-F. This is from the introduction. On a sweltering August day following weeks of heightened tension with Russia over its actions in Ukraine and Syria, and harsh words between the United States and China over actions in the South China Sea, and as workers are preparing to depart the cool of their air-conditioned Manhattan office buildings for the gridlocked highways and subways, several large electric power plants along the East Coast simultaneously experienced dramatic overspeed conditions in their large turbine generators. Plant operators are unable to stop the steam turbines, whose automatic control and data systems have been infected by sophisticated computer malware, and they catastrophically tear themselves apart, cutting power to large segments of the population and industries in the Northeast. Building systems shut down, hospitals switch to emergency generators, trains stop running, traffic lights cease operating, and Wall Street trading comes to a halt. At the same time, 1,100 miles to the south, a massive rocket sits fueled and ready to launch a critical national security satellite when an explosive-laden private aircraft flies at low altitude into the Cape Canaveral launch pad area and, despite repeated warnings, slams into the pressurized fuel tank and solid rocket motors, creating an enormous conflagration. Half a world away, elite commandos equipped with the latest high-technology equipment but unidentifiable as a national army attack U.S. and allied interests near areas of disputed territory. Thus are fired the opening shots of a new war. These hypothetical events represent a radically different style of conflict fought with new tools and against new and unfamiliar enemies. When most people think of war, they imagine soldiers doing battle with other soldiers, employing tanks, artillery, and other recognizable weapons. However, in this century, war has morphed into something we can scarcely recognize, and future conflicts will be qualitatively and quantitatively unlike those of the past. They will be fought using innovative and unusual weapons, many of which, because the technologies have both civilian and military uses, will be available to far more people who are far less skilled in their employment. The so-called democratization of technology has diminished the monopoly of advanced countries on the tools of war. 21st century armed conflicts often have no battlefield in the traditional sense. The concept of opposing armies clashing in deadly struggle but moderated by international conventions of behavior seems a thing of the past. In 1999, Chinese colonels Kuo Liang and Wang Shuangshui predicted that soldiers would increasingly be computer hackers, financiers, drug smugglers, and agents of private corporations rather than members of a military, and that their weapons would include not only airplanes, cannons, poison gas bombs, and biochemical agents, but also computer viruses, net browsers, and financial derivative tools. Their predictions were prescient. Yesterday's wars were, like World War II, about saving civilized nations from maniacal dictators, or like the conflicts in Vietnam and Korea, devoted to a clash of ideologies in the attempt to limit the spread of one hegemon over another. They were big affairs involving large military forces and enormous violence. Today's wars are more about cultural and religious hatreds, using violence as a means to change the hearts and minds of people, among whom the killing occurs with more frequency. Tomorrow's wars will be different still, fought largely for political dominance with stealth and cunning, targeting innocents and institutions, heavily dependent on information superiority, and employing strange new weapons. While we have a highly motivated and well-trained and equipped armed forces that will adapt, we are not prepared as a nation to react well to the inevitably messy and ambiguous situations these new conflicts and weapons will present. We still have no clear idea of what constitutes an act of war in cyberspace now, nor of how we might respond to such an act. It is not enough for the military to be prepared. Neither the public nor its decision makers have yet fully comprehended the significance of the changes in the types of conflict and the tools with which they will be fought. Without question, there will be circumstances when decision makers will find it necessary, or at least think it necessary, to send soldiers into classic boots-on-the-ground combat situations. We will continue to project force with our powerful aircraft, our munitions, and our aircraft carrier strike groups. When war is fought in foreign lands, it could well be against other high-tech armies. However, war will increasingly be more personal and often fought closer to home. It will not lend itself to the traditional massive displays of U.S. firepower. It will affect individuals directly, not as some distant conflict we read about in newspapers or watch in the movies or on the internet. Americans will be targeted on U.S. soil, often, as we have seen in San Bernardino and Orlando, by homegrown terrorists. This form of war will be messy and complex, and it will not lend itself to easy, quick, soundbite solutions. It may not even be clear for a while who perpetrated the violence against us. Was it state-sponsored or a random act of terror? Will we unleash massive destruction on foreign countries in retaliation for attacks by terrorists residing on our own soil? If so, to what end and with what consequences? There are always consequences, whether they be the death or capture of our own troops, unnecessary civilian casualties, or the incitement of more violence. The book Future War by Robert Latif.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. Mikhail Gorbachev has passed away at the age of 91. And there was, actually I printed it, and if you could grab that out of the printer, Sean, I'd really appreciate it, because I already deleted it on my computer. There's a tweet running around about Gorbachev, as what he did with the Soviet Union and all this kind of stuff. He was, quite literally the last leader of the Soviet Union. Thank you. And, this guy tweeted, Gorbachev died. His legacy, Russia's GDP dropped by 40%, real wages halved, poverty ballooned by 2.2 million in 87-88 to 66 million in 93-95. Millions died under the brutal regime of privatization and shock therapy. 500,000 women were trafficked into sexual slavery. All that stuff happened. But none of it happened because of Gorbachev. and this is just what's so shocking to me. Gorbachev dissolved essentially the Soviet Union. And, and he did it because he wanted to turn Russia, the new Russia, the post-Soviet Union Russia, into Sweden. And no, I'm not exaggerating. This is, and not making that up. I mean, this is, in fact, there's a chapter about this, or part of a chapter about this, in my new book, The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, How Reaganism Gutted America. It's on page 63 and 64. And it's what happened was that when Gorbachev started dissolving the Soviet Union, there was this huge effort to impose neoliberalism on countries. This was a project that started in the 1950s in the United States. Milton Friedman was its main proponent. It was a project that was embraced by the Republican Party in 1980, and Ronald Reagan imposed neoliberalism on the United States in 1981. Neoliberalism destroy labor unions, lower wages, cut taxes on rich people, embrace free trade so that companies can get their labor in other countries that are cheaper. These are the dimensions of the kind of the core premises of neoliberalism. And we tried it here. It gutted the middle class. They tried it in Chile with Pinochet, where we tried it with Pinochet. The CIA and ITT helped. And it was a disaster. China dodged the bullet in '88 when I was in China. They decided, no, we're not going to do this, which was an amazing thing. And so China said, no, we're not going to do this. And Russia was not going to embrace neoliberalism. Gorbachev literally said he wanted to reshape Russia along the lines of Sweden. He wanted and he thought it was a logical transition out of communism. In communism, everybody had health care, everybody had housing, there was a complete and comprehensive social safety net. And he's saying, no, let's bring in capitalism, but let's maintain a strong social safety net. Let's do it like Sweden. And who blew that up in 1991? George Herbert Walker Bush. G.H.W. Bush was completely committed to neoliberalism, to this ideology of free trade and all this other BS that goes with it. And he got together with the International Monetary Fund in order to make this transition out of the Soviet Union and into an independent state of Russia. They needed loans. They needed international loans. And George Herbert Walker Bush and the IMF basically went to Gorbachev and then later to Yeltsin. Actually, most of this happened under Yeltsin. It didn't even happen under Gorbachev. Gorbachev was out of there when this happened. This was during the reign of Yeltsin. And I was in Russia during that time. I was working in Kaliningrad occasionally, and with the International Relief Project that I work with. And at that time, they said, if you want these loans, you are going to have to embrace neoliberalism. You're going to have to undergo what they referred to then as shock therapy. And that shock therapy, that neoliberal shock therapy, was what turned Russia into an autocratic oligarchic state. Because neoliberalism always produces oligarchy. It has here in the United States. The Supreme Court embraced neoliberalism with the Citizens United ruling and the ones that preceded it. And poof, we've got now billionaires running our politics and sponsoring our politicians. J.D. Vance, for example, he's got 2 billionaires who funded almost, most of his campaign. This is happening all over the country. Billionaires come here in Oregon. We've got a Democrat running, and our former Tina Kotek, the former Speaker of the House, really good Democrat running against a wackadoodle Republican. And we've got two billionaires in this state who decided to get behind a former Democrat, Betsy Johnson, and throw a whole pile of money into her campaign. And so we've got, there's a very good chance we're going to end up with a Republican governor because she's going to split the vote. Because these billionaires are playing in politics. This is neoliberalism. This is what was imposed on the Soviet Union in a much more severe form through the so-called shock therapy in that period from 1992, really 1992 through 98, 99, more or less. And that's where it's at. So my friend Lila Connors, after the Soviet Union fell, she went over there and she had connections to Gorbachev. She produced a movie called Arrow of Time in which she spent hours interviewing Gorbachev. And that movie is on the Need to Know website. You can Google Need to Know Gorbachev Connors, and I'm sure it'll pop right up. And it's an amazing documentary where Gorbachev just pours it out, just lays it out, how he was trying to create a progressive, paradise in Russia. And he would have done it if George Herbert Walker Bush had not sabotaged it and basically coerced the IMF to go along with it. Because back in the 90s, neoliberalism was the new hot thing. So anyhow, you can read all about it in my new book, The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, How Reaganism Gutted America, which will be in bookstores in, I think a week and a half or thereabouts, shipping from, all your online sources as well. And I'll be doing a book signing, in fact, with Powell's online. We'll be doing a Zoom on this. So I'm guessing by then the whole Gorbachev thing will be no longer in the news. But one other thing I wanted to share with you very quickly, how how are the Trump humpers? How are the right wingers? What are they hearing from their media? What are they thinking? Yesterday in the Writing newsletter, the top stories, the top 10 stories, the role of weed in America's decline, that was at Liberty Loft. The left moves to normalize pedophilia, that was on front page. By the way, Ron DeSantis is now attacking Charlie Crist's running mate, who was the head of the teachers union, because there was a pedophile teacher down there, and he's saying, oh, she was helping protect. Not true. It's a false allegation, but as Mark Twain said, a lie can get all the way around the world before the truth gets its boots on. So anyhow, that was number two. Number three, post-millennial counselor for sex offenders defends pedophiles as a marginalized minority. Washington Examiner, the left's gender-bending obsession is tiresome and absurd. Blue State Conservative, Dr. Fauci is a mass murderer. I mean, this is the kind of wackadoodle stuff that was in the news yesterday on the hard right. Today, the Writing newsletter, the top headline is "Impeach and Convict President Biden to Save Our Political System." Dems use Nazi techniques to alter their history. Dems are lying and everyone knows it. Is the left preparing for civil war? That was over at Town Hall. DOJ releases supposedly damning photo in late-night filing. And the left's effort to reshape Arizona's election laws has failed. And New York Times continues its long history of covering for commies with Gorbachev obit. Right. Give me a break. Anyhow, that's what's up in the news on the right, on the hard right, on the far right, on the crazy right, whatever you want to call it. And that's the true story, the actual story of Mikhail Gorbachev. And he was a good guy. And he really, had he succeeded, had he not been frustrated in his efforts by George Herbert Walker Bush, Russia probably would have joined the European Union and would have been a good neighbor. And Putin never would have had power.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back. It's 15 minutes past the hour. Pick up your calls after this. And welcome back. Brian in Booth Bay, Maine. Excuse me. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Hello. I've got so much to talk about, so cut me off when you have to. First point, ERB, Epic Rap Battles of History, is a YouTube channel. They have a video with Gorbachev as one of their subjects. So if you want a good laugh, check out Epic Rap Battles of History.
All right.
There's dozens, maybe hundreds of them. Anyway, the point I really wanted to make is to call Biden and thank him. Call the White House and thank the White House for relieving people like me with, $10,000+ of student loan debt.
Yeah, and the number, by the way, the comment line for the White House is 202-456-1111.
Yeah, and it's critical that we give them our praise when they do the right thing, because I'm sure all they're getting is flack.
Sure.
Anyway,
right.
I also want to say that we should tax billionaires out of existence. I think billionaires are, think about it, $999,999,990.99. How many yachts can you buy with that amount of money? And $1 more than that should be taxed out of existence.
Yeah.
And my final point, if I may, I want to recommend a fantastic book called The China Study. It was published in 2006. Maybe you've talked about it already. The author is T. Colin Campbell. And it has very little to do with politics. It has to do with food, nutrition, health, cancer rates, a massive study that was done in the 70s, right after China opens their borders, more or less, and, came out of isolationism. This guy, Campbell, Dr. Campbell, was one of the leaders of a massive health and nutrition study, and they were able to go in and document thousands of Chinese laborers and workers in the cities and the rural areas and it gave us an amazing snapshot into the dietary and nutritional well-being of a fairly isolated society, a culture.
Right. And the consequences
that has allowed, and it has allowed him, Campbell, to compare that to the dietary, supplements and well-being of people around the world. It's an absolutely phenomenal, life-changing book. When my stepdad read it, I was already about 8 or 10 years into being a vegetarian.
This was the book that showed that the lower the amount of animal protein in your diet, the lower your cancer rate and heart disease rate, wasn't it?
Not just cancer rate, but heart disease and every ailment that we suffer as a wealthy nation. He calls them diseases of affluence.
Right.
Those are virtually non-existent in cultures that have a whole food, plant-based diet. So that's the final point.
Yeah, and in those cultures, I mean, they still eat meat and eggs and things like that, but they use them as condiments rather than as primary courses. So
right. It's a vanishingly small proportion of their daily intake.
Right.
Yes, everyone should read
like the flavoring in the soup. Yeah, I'm with you, Brian. I'm familiar with it. Thank you very much for the call, and thanks for watching us there on YouTube. We'll be right back. It's 19 minutes past the hour. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. The New York Times has put together just an amazing graphic where they took all the record temperatures from last year, from 2021, and put the red ones being hot and blue ones being cold, put them as little dots on a map of the United States. And it sure looks to me like what we're seeing is the collapse of the jet stream. If you watch weather shows on TV and things like that, what you see is, some very odd. Well, we saw this, for example, with that cold snap last a year ago, February, where the jet stream just kind of drooled all the way down, carried Arctic air all the way down into, southern Texas and northern Mexico, froze Texas up, shut down their power systems and things like that. And it's blocking the movement of air here in the Pacific Northwest, and thus we're getting these massive heat waves. I think that we all need to keep an eye on this. I've got a video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. You can check it out there. Welcome back. 21 minutes past the hour, picking up your phone calls. Marianne in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Marianne, what's on your mind today?
Oh, my gosh. I have to get back to thinking here because I was waiting. Yeah, Tom, you likely already know this, and your audience likely does too, but just in case, that there are now solar-powered cars coming out with solar panels all over them. And one of my neighbors down the street has ordered one. It's called the name of the company is APTERA, Aptera, but there are several companies that are creating these solar-powered cars, which would solve the problem of having to even use electricity.
Yeah, I've seen them, and they're also plug-in cars because
maybe.
It takes a lot of solar power to charge a car, and that works if you don't drive a lot and you do park your car out in the sun and you live in a part of the country where there's a lot of sun, But it is, it's like step by step. This is how the country is moving forward.
Yeah, you live here in Phoenix like I do. So.
Yeah, it's perfect. It's perfect. That's great.
Yeah. Okay. I just thought I'd let you know. Well, but likely, you said you already know. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. Thanks for sharing that. CJ in Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. Hey, CJ, what's on your mind today?
Hey. Thanks for the great show.
Thank you.
I just wanted to let you know what's most obvious to me is in early this year, February timeframe, we launched USA 326. It's an intelligence satellite, it was in development up until February. So probably 2016, they had to start developing this Intel satellite. And in August, between the 1st and the 8th, somewhere in there, Russia launched a counter-Intel satellite and got within 0.4 degree accuracy. Now, if they didn't have the coordinates, altitude, velocity, speed, vector, there is so much trigonometry to try and shoot an arrow with an arrow.
You think Trump laundered that money to them? I mean, that information, that intelligence? Is that where you're going with that?
That's the most blatant I could see of how Russia could be so accurate.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, anything's possible.
If you search a satellite dangerously close, you'll find out the articles.
Yeah, I'll check it out. CJ, thank you. That's a grim thought. Thank you. Barry in Denver. Hey, Barry, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm well. What's up?
To reverse climate change, the main thing that we can do, the number one main thing we can do is to love each other, right? The number two thing you can do is to reverse desertification. And you can talk about this to anybody. It's a non-political topic.
Yeah, we did this in the 1930s. You know, we had the Dust Bowl because so many trees have been cut down, and Franklin Roosevelt started the CCC, planted over 1 million trees, and ended the Dust Bowl.
Yeah, and here's what you can do when you plant plants and trees. You can feed hungry humans. It restores the topsoil, which fills dry creek beds up with water, like magic. It captures carbon, and it undoes the drought flood cycle.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right on all those points, and we all should be planting as much as we can everywhere we can. And Barry, I'm with you. Thank you very much for sharing that. Ron in Clearwater, Florida. Hey, Ron, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking the call. 2 points. One is the bifurcation of reality. The deeper I think it sets into our country, of which we've never been here before, where we've got so many ways to target information and news, that reality on one side never transcends onto the other side. So we're literally creating two worlds here. And I think that it's going to come to a head in civil war or some other dangerous fashion, especially when you have someone like Trump that can light the match.
Yeah, it does concern me. Yes.
Yeah, it does. The second thing is, if someone takes the oath, elected official, why don't we take it more seriously when they take the oath by, let's say, administering the oath with a federal agent?
Well, I think the oath is taken by a federal agent. I mean, it's the oath is administered by federal employees to federal employees, and the oath of office is a real thing. And violation of the oath does have penalties.
Well, that should be the beginning of the end for a lot of these violations.
Yeah, I think it frankly should be the beginning of the end for a whole lot of Republican politicians right now. I mean, you know, it's like, you know, what has, I mean, some of the things that some of these folks, you know, the Greens and Boeberts of the world, and Lindsey Graham now trying to, you know, crank up riots in the streets and get Americans shooting at each other. I mean, you know, how this qualifies you as some kind of an American patriot, I don't understand. Ron, thank you for the call. Up next, Malcolm Nance is going to be with us for the whole half hour. We've got a fascinating conversation coming up, so be sure to stick around. It is 27 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Telling the truths the multinational corporations would really rather you didn't know all about. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Up next, Malcolm Nance. Stick around. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stokely, A Life by Peniel E. Joseph. This is from the preface. Stokely Carmichael is a troubling icon of America's civil rights years. His Black Power call became a national Rorschach test. Whereas many blacks viewed it as righteous, many whites saw violent foreboding. Newspapers brooded over Carmichael's words, quickly forming a consensus that judged the slogan to be at best intemperate and at worst a blatant call for anti-white violence and reverse racism. In 1966, Black Power reverberated around the world, galvanizing blacks, outraging whites, and inspiring a cross-section of ethnic and racial minorities. In 1969, Carmichael left the United States for Conakry, Guinea, where he reinvented himself as a roving Pan-Africanist organizer and professional revolutionary. For the next 30 years, he remained an energetic dissident, a throwback to the heady years of the 1960s. Carmichael turned the quest for black political power into his life's work. His faith in a style of politics many considered anachronistic came out of the same tenacity and stubbornness that once made him one of the most effective and controversial activists of his generation. These same qualities, however, limited Carmichael's efforts as a Pan-Africanist political mobilizer. Before leaving America, Stokely resigned as Black Power's glamorous enfant terrible. Telegenic, brash, equal parts angry and gregarious, whether dressed in three-piece suits, leather jackets, sharecroppers' overhauls, or African dashikis, Carmichael became to represent the era's multifaceted identity, a hipster hero whose easy grace allowed him to consort effortlessly with both the dignified and the damned. The name Stokely Carmichael first came into my consciousness when I was a young boy coming of age in New York City. As the proud son of a Haitian mother who belonged to local 1199 Hospital Workers Union, part of SEIU, I grew up hearing stories of how civil rights activists, Black Power revolutionaries, Pan-Africanist freedom fighters, and trade unionists helped to shape a new world in America and beyond. By the time I was in elementary school, I was on my first picket line, accompanying my mother in support of an 1199 strike. Both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King supported 1199 during the 1960s. Stokely Carmichael's political importance came into sharper focus when I was in junior high after the premiere of the landmark PBS documentary series Eyes on the Prize, which featured the 24-year-old Carmichael's fiery Black Power speech and rightly characterized Stokely as his generation's heir to Malcolm X. Over the course of a decade of research on Carmichael, I would come to understand him as that and much more. Carmichael's youth, casual dress, and charisma made him an easily identifiable hero, one whose quick smile and passionate speeches left an indelible impression. An adopted son of the South by way of Trinidad, the Bronx, and Harlem, Stokely adapted while transforming whatever environment he encountered. As a native New Yorker growing up in the city's tense racial climate of the 1980s, I found Carmichael's survival instincts appealing. As a young graduate student in Philadelphia, I had the opportunity to hear him speak and briefly met him afterward. He encouraged me to stay committed to the Black freedom movement, a struggle he defined as infinite. With his flowing African robes, gray hair, and white beard, he looked like a prince. And he had changed his name. He was no longer Stokely Carmichael. As Malcolm Little had become Malcolm X and later El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, Stokely had become Kwame Ture. It was a name that paid homage to his two African heroes, men who had been the first presidents of their countries, Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah and Guinea's Sékou Touré. Kwame Ture spelled the Guinean's name not as the French did, as white Europeans did, but as Arabs and Muslims did. Sékou Touré, S-E-K-U-T-U-R-E. As a college student, Carmichael helped transform America by organizing sit-ins, demonstrations, and voter registrations during the civil rights movement's heroic years, a period that roughly encompasses the decade between the 1954 Brown v. Board Supreme Court decision, desegregation decision, and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and has become enshrined in public memory through national holidays, films, commemorations, and monuments. Carmichael's deep sense of justice contributed to his evolution into Kwame Ture, the Pan-Africanist revolutionary and anti-capitalist organizer who moved to West Africa and remained tenacious in the face of searing political setbacks. Carmichael ultimately judged America incapable of creating the free and just world he had struggled for as a young man. But despite living in Africa for the final 30 years of his life, Carmichael's legendary stature as a black power activist lingered even if many ignored his lasting contributions to civil rights struggles that included a bruising quest for the vote in the Deep South. Although today largely forgotten, Stokely Carmichael remains one of the protean figures of the 20th century, a revolutionary who passionately believed in self-defense and armed rebellion, even as he revered nonviolence. The book Stokely, A Life, by Peniel L. Joseph. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. On the line with us, one of America's truly great patriots, Malcolm Nance, the former U.S. intelligence agent, authority, expert, current expert, I would say, the author of numerous New York Times best-selling books, most recently, The Plot to Destroy Democracy, and his new one, They Want to Kill Americans, right here in my hand. Malcolm, welcome back to the program. You just got back from Ukraine, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask you what you learned from that trip and what message you'd like Americans to know about what that situation over there.
Well, as you know, or may not know, I was a member of the International Legion for the Territorial Defense of Ukraine. We are a infantry battalion assigned to the Ukrainian Army. We are a full-time combat force with a section of the 2,000 kilometers of front line facing Russian forces.
Wow, this is like the French Foreign Legion back in the day?
Well, this is a little bit more involved than the French Foreign Legion. We're not assigned to individual outposts. We're much more currently closer to the modern French Foreign Legion, where we go on combat operations, we go on combat missions, and we do protect sections of the Ukrainian Army line. We're attached to a brigade that's Ukrainian. We have Ukrainian officers. But we have people from 56 nations. Wow. And it is really a very, very interesting situation. It is unlike the Spanish Civil War. These are not civilians running around, in civilian clothes. We are combat soldiers in the Ukrainian army. And, I left MSNBC and the news media to come and offer my services. And, it's a tough job, but I'm going back to it at the end of this week, after this book tour is finished, to go back to defending the eastern wing of the wall of democracy. Wow.
I honor your commitment. I really and truly do. This Russian war, I don't even want to call it a war. This is terrorism, what Putin is doing, is it not?
It is. And that's because the intent of Russia's invasion was for the government to just collapse and turn over the country to them. And anyone who was there in the pre-war, I went down to Donetsk with the senior battle commanders in the Ukrainian army. And this is where the U.S. news media made a very big mistake. It was clear to me that the 250,000 Ukrainians were going to fight with hammer and tongue. And that's precisely what they did. They were completely underestimated. They wiped out 3 entire Russian armies in the north and devastated their logistics trains. And now the Russians are doing this little incremental attacks in the east to take the borders of Donetsk and Luhansk, which was not what the intention was. The intention was to take the nation of Ukraine, eliminate its leadership, ground up its intellectuals, wipe out its language. And you don't have to believe me. The Russians said this. Vladimir Putin said this himself. This was a war of national existence. And the Russians decided that they were going to do it, and they are losing. They are losing badly.
Well, and let's hope it continues. I'm sure there's twists and turns to come down the road. You have a new book out. It's called They Want to Kill Americans, The Malicious, Terrorists, and Deranged Ideology of the Trump Insurgency, by Malcolm Nance, who we're speaking with right now. Tell us about the book, Malcolm. What inspired you to write it, and what's the essential message of it?
I started this book in August of 2020, a few months before the election. And some of the things that I was seeing, I explained to people, it's very hard for them to understand why and how a journalist could be so fast on getting these analyses out. This book was completed a year ago. The reason is I'm not a journalist. I'm a spy that talked on television. So you were really getting the benefit of my career analyses without, the typical procedures that journalists use. We generally steal our information. Journalists have to develop their information. But in this particular instance, I was monitoring the communications and chats of right-wing extremists all around the United States. And it was clear they were weaponizing, they were spooling up for an attempt to either defend Donald Trump at the end of the election or overthrow the government after the election if they had lost. That was very clear. And I famously went on Real Time with Bill Maher on November 6th, 2 days after the election, and said the United States is going into a paramilitary insurgency by these armed Americans. So, everything that I wrote came true. 62 days later, the insurrection happened. But I want your audience to know that an insurrection is not an insurgency. An insurgency is many insurrections and political activities, which they reject the current government and then, of course, destabilize it so that they can overthrow that government.
We're talking with Malcolm Nance's new book, They Want to Kill Americans. Malcolm, how best can America respond to this? It appears to me that at the core of the militia movement across the United States basically is, white supremacist, in large part, reaction, I think, to the Obama presidency. I was pointing out in the previous segment that in 2005, every single Republican in the United States Senate voted to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act. In 2013, every single Republican in the Senate voted no to reauthorizing the Voting Rights Act. And it seems to me like, during Reconstruction, during that period, 1866 to 1876, we had 1,500 African Americans elected to political office, 600 of them state legislatures, 18 in Congress, the federal Congress. And the blowback was the election of 1876 and, stabbing black people in the back, basically, in 1877, ending Reconstruction. My sense is that we are in this second era of Reconstruction, as it were, of trying to establish a multiracial, pluralistic, true democracy in this country. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that racism seems to be driving an enormous amount of this Republican backlash. What say you?
Your analogy of the Reconstruction era is very accurate. And what came out of that, electing those black officials, allowing them equal opportunity under the law, the rise of the first revival of the Ku Klux Klan.
Yep.
The Ku Klux Klan origins. But unlike what we're doing right now, when the Ku Klux Klan rose up, started killing politicians, started, taking over, threatening, intimidating communities, we used the U.S. Army to put them down ruthlessly, arrested entire bodies of public officials who were part of the Klan. What's happening now is the exact opposite. They are being rewarded for their racism. The entire basis of what I call the Titus, Titus, which is the collective name of the Trump insurgency in the United States. That's Trump, his political party, the Republican Party, maintaining the political wing, the paramilitaries, the terrorists, the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys maintaining the military wing, and then the typical base Republican voter who just hate everything that America stands for now and idolizes Donald Trump. That is the Titus. It is a collective body of rejectionism of America. And what these people are basing all this on is straight up racism, white supremacy. And I don't want to hear from any of them that they're not racist, because the entire basis of this, it really started with Barack Obama's election, and their whole basis, if you listen to them, the Obama era was the worst era in modern American history. And you wonder, these people are so detached from reality that they don't care whether they live in a world of lies, so long as they can feel comfortable about the camouflage that is their white skin. I would not say this, any differently if this was Papua New Guinea, or if this was Burundi, or if you had told me to do an analysis of, Polish electoral knowledge. There are foreign intelligence agencies writing reports about how the fundamental core racism of America has been reharnessed by their tribal leader, Donald Trump, and has given them permission to be openly indecent and openly racist in this country. And believe me, it's going to get a lot worse.
So how do we as a nation fight back against this? The one big difference between now and 1877 is that right now the 5-year-olds going into school are about 50-50, white people and people of color, whereas back then it was a very, very different scenario. We've got a Zoomer generation that is committed to pluralistic multiracial democracy.
Right.
That seems to me like a good thing, a good start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a good thing. It's a great start. It's the fulfillment of the American dream. It's us, harnessing our better angels. However, 1/3 of this nation, and they're older, they're my age, they're, for the most part, and they're young children, all right, who are relatively wealthy, not poor. These aren't the poor whites. Yes, they do have a lot of Walmart shoppers. These are the people, as the Washington Post study showed, own a vacation house, own a very large boat. You might remember the Trump boat parades, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you wonder, where are these people with the giant trucks that could go and, drive around at 1 mile per gallon?
Yeah, $60,000 trucks.
Right. Go, feel that they are losing America. What they believe that they are losing is that they are losing their position of absolute power and authority, and that they have to, God forbid, share in the American experiment. Thomas Ricks, the political writer, put it, I'm going to paraphrase him, where he said, there is an entire body of white America that have decided that if they can't have their version of America, their white supremacist, white nationalist version of America, then they don't want America. They will turn this country into a straight up Trump or DeSantis-led dictatorship to rule over the other 65% of the country.
Yeah, and DeSantis is demonstrating his racist chops with his, book banning and anti-CRT laws down in Florida. So, Malcolm, we just have a minute or so till we're going to hit a hard break here. What's your advice for Americans right across the board, from black Americans to your white allies?
This November is the defining election of American history, and we said that in 2020. It was true. Now it's back again. We're in extra innings. If we lose this election to the Republicans in the House or the Senate, the American democracy ends. The American republic ends. They will codify dictatorship. They have said they will do it. And they've also said they will come after every individual who opposed them. I take them at their word. And these armed Americans are the ones who are going to execute that strategy. There's the one thing that we can do, and that's people power. They cannot stand people standing up to them. We have to turn out 20 to 25% more than we turned out in 2018 to overwhelmingly defeat the strategies that they put in place to take the vote from blacks. But they are relying on apathy of blacks and Latinos and Hispanic and women. And we must wipe that out. We have to mobilize everyone to save America.
Amen. The book is They Want to Kill Americans. The author, Malcolm Nance. Malcolm, thanks so much for dropping by.
My pleasure.
And stay safe when you get back to Ukraine, please.
I will.
And give us a report from time to time. Thanks a lot.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with your calls after this. It's 47 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Talk media for the sane among us. Yes, we're still here. And welcome back. Steve in Topanga, California. Hey, Steve, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
My pleasure, Tom. Thank you so much for what you do. I'm honored to be following in the wake of Malcolm Nance.
Yeah, he's quite a guy.
Yeah, I've read several of his books. And just to begin with, I would probably agree with you conservatively with 90% of the positions you take. But where I'm at these days is I think the only thing that we progressives need to do is focus on abortion, number one, and number 1.5 is gun control. Because the only thing that will do what Malcolm Nance proposes is to get the people to go to the voting polls to vote. And I think abortion is the one issue that will motivate the populace.
I think you're right. That I think both those issues will. There's widespread support for bringing back the assault weapons ban, for example. Widespread.
I got it.
Support. So yeah, I think they're both. I think you're right.
Not that I can tell you what to do, because I have total respect for who you are as a scholar and a historian. I've read several of your books. I think all of these other issues, including climate, are a distraction. We can't afford it. LGBT, all these issues that make so much sense to people of conscience are a distraction, and it's part of the red herrings and the distraction that the Republican Party is going to throw at us. And folks like yourself, the more we can focus on harnessing the reaction to abortion and to the automatic weapons, the more likely we are to get people to the polls. Yeah. That's the only thing that happens.
I'm with you, Steve. We have to, and we can walk and chew gum at the same time. But that said, when you're running an election, you basically can't run on more than 3 issues. And we have to decide what those 3 issues are. And I think certainly the 2 of them are abortion and guns. The third one, we can debate. Lewis, and thank you for the call. Lewis in Norristown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Lewis, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. This is something that people haven't been talking much about, but I think we're not going to be able to win this war against the rise in fascism and authoritarianism without the help of the mainstream media. And hear me out really quick. I feel that we need to put pressure on individual anchors on MSNBC and CNN to sort of persuade voters to go out and vote for Democrats. In a right-wing dictatorship, in dictatorships, period, journalists are usually the first people they go against. It doesn't matter if they work for corporations. They're still going to go after them because they're liberals. And one way that they can do this in a big way is report on how Republicans voted against measures to lower gas prices, how they voted against measures to ease the baby formula shortage, how they voted against lowering drug prices, and report on these kinds of things every single day to remind the voters what's at stake and what. Yeah,
what you're arguing for, Lewis, is the old work the refs strategy that Lee Atwater was pitching back in the 80s. Whenever the media says anything that's unfavorable to Republicans or is favorable to Democrats, they would jump all over those individual reporters and yell and scream about them until they all got gun shy. It really worked. I agree. We need to be doing essentially the same thing.
Yeah. Yep.
Only in reverse, obviously. Lewis, thank you. Thank you. Spot on. Yep. At 51 minutes past the hour, we'll be back in 60 seconds with more of your calls. Stick around. We'll be right back. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. The Economic Policy Institute just came out with a great summary of what's causing inflation and what are the myths about inflation. They go through the 5 major myths, the lies. Number 1, that workers' wage growth is driving inflation. Actually, workers' wage growth is going up more slowly than inflation. It's holding inflation back. Myth number 2, that corporate profits are not the cause of inflation. Actually, more than half of the inflation that we're experiencing right now can be tracked directly to corporations ripping us off. Myth number 3, federal relief and recovery measures overheated the economy and caused inflation. If you look over the last 40 years, you see that that's very much not the case. You might be able to build a case for the Fed feeding it, but probably not. Myth number 4, removing import tariffs would be a major tool to fight inflation. Not so much. And myth number 5, investing in child care and elder care would accelerate it. Nope, not the case. There's a whole video about this over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Back picking up your calls here. Vic in Manhattan, Illinois. Hey, Vic, what's on your mind?
Well, I want to talk about, I think the biggest challenge to democracy is restoring faith in the real press. And I don't see any effort for that. You know, the Republicans for the last 40 years have done a great job of destroying faith in the real press, and that's why they've got the strength that they've got today.
And the vote. Those are the two pillars: the belief that your vote will be counted, and belief that we are, and a shared set of facts, a shared understanding of what's real.
That's right. Now, a lot, last few talkers talked about Republicans. I mean, there's some of the Republicans. I've got family, I've got friends that preach the Republican creed at the moment, but they're just flat brainwashed. Yeah. All they do is watch Fox News and they're brainwashed. And there's been studies, there's been one that PBS did, and then there was another one fairly recently. If you can get people away from that, I don't think we've got the legislation to stop Fox News or some of the right-wing stuff, but if we could educate people. So what I'm thinking we need is a two-stage approach. One would be maybe 2 or 3 hour-long sessions, TV programs, actually focused, where you get the real press talking about how real journalism works, blowing holes in some of the stuff that that's published now by Fox News and Alex Jones and all those guys. I mean, just tear it up. But it should be something that I could share maybe with a cousin or a work associate. Hey, you got to watch this. This is really giving you something to think about. And then the second stage would be, because we got to do something to convert people now. And then the second stage is we got to teach our kids. I've got grandkids in school now. They don't get taught real civics. It's an hour or two in social studies. When I went to school, we had a whole year on civics where they taught local.
Oh, same here. We did a field trip when I was like in 4th or 5th grade down to the state capitol. Right. I mean, it was a big deal. So we
need to focus our kids. We need to teach them real civics. We need to teach them real journalism. We need to teach them real logical arguments. Half of the junk that comes out on Fox News, especially from the commentators, it doesn't hold up even to the easiest. There's rules of logical argument, and they just blow past it.
Yeah.
We need to teach our people.
I completely get it, Vic. I don't think a 2 or 3 hour program. We need to figure out how to bumper stickerize it as well. But yeah, I'm with you. And this is the work that Media Matters has been doing, MediaMatters.org, for years now. Just debunking Fox News. Thank you for the call. Joan in Rochester, Minnesota. Hey, Joan, what's on your mind?
Well, I was thinking about the climate change things that are going on. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that really concerns me is the water table in our country. We have Lake Mead, which has almost nearly disappeared, right where it stands. And we have these bottling companies just scarfing up and depleting all our water table for the whole country. The water that's under me and the water that's under you, it belongs to everybody in this country. Yeah. But they're bottling it and selling it back to us in horrible plastic bottles. And I know this will be a hard thing because people don't want to give that up. But there's wells that are going dry and places that if this
I'm with you, Joan. And I think the most effective way to push back against this is to point out to people that there can be up to 10,000 microscopic particles of plastic in a single bottle of bottled water. Do you really, and microplastics like that damage your body? Do you really want that stuff in your body? Just drink
for audio and video
Joan,
archives, visit ThomHartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, We also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.